Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. So, last week was a bit of a special episode because it was the start of things. And now we're returning to the actual format for season 3 anyway. The last week's 2 episodes ran a little long because I was a little overexcited. But don't worry about it. It's fine. We're now getting back on to the regular amount of time. So we're gonna pick up where we left off with the issue of Astounding Stories. We started last week, and we're gonna start reading The Second Satellite by who is it by? Edmund Hamilton. Um, what else? Have we missed anything between Paper Cuts episodes here? I finished some embroidering. That's always nice. I've been really digging in on Visible Men's lately. Do not eat that. I've been really digging in on Visible Men's lately, and that's been a lot of fun. I've been really learning how shockingly easy it is to mend your own clothes. Like, I've always had this assumption that mending your clothes is super hard, but it's actually not that bad. You only need to know like 2 or 3 stitches if you want to do it, simply. I'm overdoing it because they're meant to be visible men's that are visible consistently, and you want to have them be, a decorative addition to your clothing rather than just, oh yeah, I fixed this and you can kind of see where the fix would be. It's like you're supposed to highlight it. And so I've been looking up very elaborate embroidery stitches to work on smaller holes in my clothing in comparison to the what's the word I'm looking for, in comparison to the sashiko for the larger holes. So it's all been very pleasant, honestly. I've been having a really good time doing it, honestly, and I heartily suggest it. We will later in the show, a couple books from now, I think, I'll be reading a really great solar punk story that really kind of opened my eyes as to, like, wow, there's a lot of things I could be doing differently because of technology. Can you believe it? And I think I've carried on at length about solar punk before, several times, and I'm really excited to get to that. But first, I need to get to this other story I've been very excited about for the past little while, and we haven't gotten around to. So once again, let's start The Second Satellite by Edmund Hamilton. Norman and Hackett, bulky in their thick flying suits, seemed to fill the little office. Across the room, Harding, the field superintendent, contemplated them. 2 planes were curving up into dawn together from the field outside, their motors thunderous as they roared over the building. When their clamor had receded, Harding spoke. I don't know which one of you two is crazier. You, Norman, to propose a fool trip like this, or you, Hackett, to go with him? Hackett grinned, but the long, lean face of Norman was earnest. Well, no doubt it sounded a little insane, but I'm convinced I'm right. The field superintendent shook his head. Norman, you ought to be writing fiction instead of flying a second satellite. And Fellows and the others on it? What the devil are you talking about? Well, what other theory can account for their disappearance? Asked Norman calmly. You know that since the new X-type planes were introduced, hundreds of flyers all over the Earth have been trying for altitude records in them. 25 miles, 30, 35, the records have been broken every day. But out of the hundreds of flyers who have gone up to see those immense heights, 4 have never come down and never been seen again. One vanished over northern Sweden, one over Australia, one over Lower California, and one, Fellows himself, right here over Long Island. You saw the globe in which I marked those 4 spots, and you saw that when they connected, they formed a perfect circle around the Earth. The only explanation is that the 4 flyers, when they reached a 40-mile height, We're caught up by some body moving round Earth in that circular orbit. Some sort of unknown moon circling Earth inside its atmosphere. A second satellite of Earth's whose existence has, until now, never been suspected. You know what's funny is, the second I started reading this, I was like, oh, the second satellite, is this going to be like another thing that I read in a different pulp? Because you know me. If you are a frequent listener of the podcast, you know me. I'm a known enjoyer of pulps and short story collections of all stripes. And so when I see a year's best science fiction in a bookstore and I have the money for it, I almost immediately spring for them, because there's always going to be one in there that you're like, oh, this is crazy. Uh, and so this one immediately made me think of, I think it's another issue of Analog, actually. Uh, One where they were on Mars, and then they were like, oh yeah, Mars has multiple moons, but we can't figure out what's leaving this big furrow on the ground. I don't know what the deal is. And then, like, eventually some things happen, and it is eventually revealed that the third moon of Mars is the thing leaving this furrow, and it's a moon that is within the inside of the planet rotating. And so as soon as this was like the second satellite, I was like, huh? What? Are we doing the moon of Mars again? Did this get published previously and then get republished later? What's going on? But we'll see. What's up, Mr. Magnus? What you doing? He's like, I'm eating. Leave me alone. Speaking of Magnus, you see this bottle of catnip spray? You might not be able to see it because the camera's a little small, or you might be only hearing me. But this bottle of catnip spray, right? It normally has a lid. Magnus, bless his little heart today, I forgot that the lid was not super tight on that, and he wriggled it off and absolutely dumped a giant amount of this catnip extract right onto his face. He was, like, miserably affected by the catnip. Like, he was panting because his heart was racing, and, like, every single little thing in the room was attracting his attention because his senses were like moving at like 9 million mile an hour. He looked he looked like he was having the worst ride of his life. He was like, and like initially when he was panting, I was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Because like normally when a cat's panting, normally when the cats are panting, I'm like, oh man, have I been keeping an eye on the temperature? Because if it gets too hot, cats will pant like dogs do. That actually happened on the way to where I am right now. I forgot to turn the AC on in the RV, and Library was like, he like got up on my lap and was panting, and I like touched him, and he was like hot to the touch. I was like, oh man, because normally cats are pretty well regulated in their temperature. And so I reached out and touched Magnus, and I was like, oh, okay, so he's not overheating. What's the deal? And, like, it took me a while to finally notice that his eyes were, like, maximum open, when normally, when the sun is shining here, the cat's eyes are little slits, but his eyes were real big for the amount of light that was in the room. I was like, oh, buddy. So he was going through it today. Everybody keep Magnus in your thoughts in case it was not in fact that catnip, but it seems like it was the catnip. And he's okay now. Or he's been okay now. We'll see if that holds. Anyhow. Harding shook his head again. Norman, your theory would be alright if not for the cold fact that no such satellite has ever been glimpsed. Can you glimpse a bullet passing you? The two flyers at Sweden and Lower California vanished within 3 hours of each other. Oh, who's here? Oh, Spunky Heart. Hello! Welcome back to the Land of the Conscious. I'm very glad you're here. Yeah, I really hope Magnus is okay, because, like, I assume that's from him getting into the catnip extract. Which, believe you me, I'm gonna be keeping a closer eye on that thing. learned my lesson. I tell you what, he was miserable, and I was like, oh, bloody. I thought he was like sick or something. Anyway, the two flyers at Sweden and Lower California vanished within 3 hours of each other on opposite sides of the Earth. That means that this second satellite, as I've computed, circles Earth more than once every 6 hours, and traveling at that terrific speed, it's no more visible of us, on Earth than a rifle bullet would be. Moving through the Earth's atmosphere at such speed, indeed, one would expect it to burn up by its own friction with the air, but it does not, because its own gravitational power draws to itself enough air to make a dense little atmosphere for itself that would cling to it and shield it as it speeds through Earth's upper air. No, I'm certain that this second satellite exists, Harding, and I'm certain that it's responsible for the vanishing of those 4 flyers. And now you and Hackett have figured when it will be passing over here, and you're going up in the next type yourselves to look for it. Look for it? We're not gonna climb 40 miles just to get a look at the darn thing. We're gonna try landing on it. You're crazy. You're crazy for sure. If Fellows and those others got caught by the thing and never came down again, why in the name of all that's holy did you two want... Oh, I think I get it now. Fellows was rather a buddy of yours, wasn't he? The best that ever flew a crippled Newport against 3 Fokkers to pull us out of a hole. That's Fokkers with an O, as in the plane? Weeks he's been gone, and if it had been Hackett and I, he'd be all over the sky looking for us. Lunatic. Well, we're not going to let him down. I see, I see. Here comes your mechanic, Norman. Your ship must be ready. I'll go with you. It's an event to see 2 Columbuses starting for another world. Ooh. No, excuse me. Apparently my throat is mad about the accent I'm doing. The gray dawnlight over the flying field was flushing to faint rose as the 3 strode out to where the long X-type stood, its strangely curved wings, enclosed cabin, and flat fan-like tail gleaming dully. Its motor was already roaring with power, and the plane's stubby wheels strained against the chocks. In their great suits, Norman and Hackett were like 2 immense ape figures out in the uncertain light. To the eyes of those about them, at least. Well, all my luck to you. You know I'm pulling for you, but I suppose it's useless to say anything about being careful. I seem to have heard the words, Hackett grinned as he and Norman shook the field superintendent's hand. It's the craziest chance. And if we don't come down at a reasonable time, well, you'll know that our theory was right. You can broadcast it or not as you please. I hope for your sake you're dead wrong. I've told you two to get off the Earth a lot of times, but I never meant it seriously, you know. Harding stepped back as the 2 clambered laboriously into the cramped cabin. Norman took the controls, the door slammed, and as the chocks were jerked back and the motor roared louder, the long plane curved up at a dizzying angle from the field into the dawn. Hackett waved a thick arm down toward the diminishing figures on the field below, then turned from the window to peer ahead with his companion. The plane flew in a narrow ascending spiral upward, at an angle that would have been impossible to do with any ship save an X-type, sentence there. Norman's eyes rose steadily over the instruments as they rose, his ears unconsciously alert for each explosion of the motor. Earth receded softly into a great gray concave surface as they climbed higher and higher. By the time the 5-mile height was reached, the Earth's surface had changed definitely from concave to convex. The plane was ascending by then in a somewhat wider spiral, but its climb was as steady and sure as ever. Frost began to form quickly on the cabin's windows, creeping out from the edges. Norman spoke a word over the motor's muffled thunder, and Hackett clicked on the electric radiators. Frost crept back as their warm, clean heat flooded the cabin. 10 miles. 15 miles. They'd already reached altitudes impossible but a few years before, though it was nothing to these X-types. As they passed the 10-mile mark, Hackett set the compact oxygen generator going. The clean, tangy odor filled the cabin as it began functioning. 20 miles. 22. After a time, Norman pointed mutely to the clock on the instrument board, and Hackett nodded. They were well within their time schedule, having calculated to reach the 40-mile height at 10 the hour. They were well within their schedule, having calculated to reach the 40-mile height at 10, the hour when, by its completed orbit, the second satellite should be passing overhead. 27, 26, 27, 28. Hackett muttered the altimeter figures to himself as the needle crept over. Glancing obliquely down through the window, he saw that Earth was now a large gray ball beneath them, white cloud oceans obscuring the drab details of its surface here and there. 31, 32. The plane was climbing more slowly and at a lesser angle. Even the X-type had to struggle to rise in the attenuated air about them. Only the super-light, super-powered plane could ever have reached that terrific height. It was at the 34-mile level that the real battle for altitude began. Norman kept the plane curving steadily upward, handling it with surpassing skill in the rarefied air. Frost was on its windows now, despite the heating mechanism. Slowly, the altimeter needle crept to the 40 mark. Norman kept the ship circling, its wings tilted slightly, but not climbing, Earth a gray misty ball beneath them. Can't keep this height long. If our second satellite doesn't show up in minutes, we've had a trip for nothing. It all seems mighty different up here. Easy to talk down there about hopping onto the thing, but up here, well, there's nothing but air and mighty little of that. There'll be more. If I'm right about this thing, we won't need to hop it, so an atmosphere will pick us up. Both looked anxious as the motor sputtered briefly, but in a moment it was again roaring steadily. Norman shook his head. Maybe a fool's errand after all. No, I'm sure we're still right. But it seems we don't have to prove it this time. Are we going down? We'll have to in minutes. Even with its own air feed, the motor can't stand this height for... Norman never found the words to finish that sentence. There was a sound, a keen, rising, rushing sound of immense power that reached their ears over the motor's roar. Then, in an instant, the universe seemed to go mad about them. They saw a gray ball of Earth and the sun above them, too, go skyrocketing around them as the plane whirled madly. The rushing sound was in that moment thunderous, terrible, and as winds smashed and rocked the plane like giant hands, Hackett glimpsed another sphere that was not the sphere of Earth, a greenish globe that expanded with lightning speed in the firmament beside their spinning plane. The winds stilled, and the green globe changed abruptly to a landscape of green land and sea toward which the plane was falling. Norman was fighting the controls. Land and sea were gyrating up to them with dizzy speed. All of a sudden, crash. With that cracking crash, the plane was motionless. With that cracking crash, the plane was motionless. Sunlight poured through its windows, and great green growths were all around it. Hackett, despite Norman's warning cry, forced the door open and was bursting outside, Norman after him. They staggered and fell with curious lightness and slowness on the ground outside. They clutched the plane for support and gazed stupefiedly around them. The plane had crashed down into a thicket of giant green reeds that rose a yard over their heads, its pancake landing having apparently not damaged. This ground beneath their feet was soft and soggy, the air warm and balmy, and the giant reeds hid all the surrounding landscape from view. In the sky, the sun burned near one horizon with unusual brilliance, but it was dwarfed in size by the huge gray circle that filled half the heavens overhead. A great gray sphere it was, screened here and there by floating white mists and clouds that had yet seen the plane on its outlines of dark continents and gleaming seas. A quaking realization held the two as they stared up at it. Earth, Norman was babbling. Earth, Hackett, it's Earth above us. By God, I can't even believe yet that we've done it. Then we're on the satellite? The second satellite. Those winds that caught us. They were the atmosphere of this world of the second satellite. They caught us and carried us on inside this smaller world's atmosphere, Hackett. We're moving with it around Earth at a terrific speed now. The second satellite, and we're on it. But these reeds, it can't all be like this. They stepped together away from the plane. The effort sent each of them sailing upward in a great slow leap to float down and no more. To float down no more than a score of feet from the plane. But unheeding in their eagerness the strange effect of the satellite's lesser gravitational power, they each moved on, each step a giant, clumsy leap. 4 such steps took them out of the towering reeds onto a clear ground. It was a gentle gray slope they were on, stretching away along a gray-green sea that extended out to the absolutely near horizon on their right. To the left, it rose into low hills covered with dense masses of green jungle-like vegetation. Hackett and Norman, though, gazed neither at the sea nor hills for the firmament, but as the half-score grotesque figures would turn toward them as they gazed, froze with horror. For the great figures, returning their gaze a few yards from them, were, in fact, frogmen. Oh, oh man, gang, I had a really long day at work today. Just a lot of things that should have been working that were not working, and that I should have been able to, that I was attempting to break to change, that continued to work after I had changed them, even though it should have broke something. Very, very stressful. Oh, my head is not. My head is full of opinions about it. I may have to recline, and you'll have to lend me a little patience if I do. For my low back has also been bothering me. Ooh. Anyway. Frogmen. Great green mottled shapes, 7 to 8 feet in height, with bowed, powerful legs and arms that ended in webbed paws. The heads were bulbous ones, in which wide, up-winking frog eyes were set at the sides, the mouths wide-lipped and white-lined. 3 of the creatures held a black metal tube and handle, oddly shaped like a target pistol. Norman! Norman! Hackett's voice was a crescendo of horror. Back to the plane! The plane! The 2 staggered back toward it, but the frogmen, recovering from their own first surprise, were running forward with great hopping steps. The 2 flyers flung themselves back, and floating leaped toward the reeds, but the green monsters were quick after them. A croaking cry came from one, and another raised his tube and handle. Something flicked from it that burst close beside Norman. There was no sound or light as it burst, but the reeds for a few feet around it completely vanished. Ooh. Honestly, my hands are kind of killing me, too. I'm just falling apart at the seams over here, aren't I? I usually take off my computer gloves after work, but I think tonight is a night I need them here, too. Also, if you all know stitches that one could use on compression style fabric like this, I would appreciate information. Yeah, that's the thing. Technically, some or most of the aches and pains that I'm experiencing are chronic. So, I just hope for days with more spoons. You know what I mean? It's like you've only got so much energy to go around, and when it comes to chronic pain, which I begrudgingly admit that I do in fact have chronic pain, it just doesn't. That's a whole thing. Like, I don't feel like I have enough chronic pain to actually say, oh, I've got chronic pain. But, like, the stream is tagged invisible disability for a reason. I just sometimes you gotta eat up more energy than you think, ignoring pain. It's kind of a whole thing. Well, and I'm especially in a weird corner because like Tylenol and other over-the-counter painkillers work inverse on me, where like it will increase the blood flow to a thing, right? Because what happens with Tylenol is what happens with painkillers generally is it works in three steps. It increases blood flow to an area, and then it depending on if you're taking the right type of painkiller, it will reduce inflammation, and then it will block the pain signal. My brain doesn't do the third thing, and so I can tell that it makes my blood flow increase to inflamed areas, and it will if I'm taking like an Aleve or whatever, the blue ones, the not Tylenol ones, that will uh, make the inflammation go down, but then it doesn't reduce the pain receptor response, and because there's a lot of blood in there, it makes it hurt more. And so really what I should do is on days that I don't have a lot of things to do, I should take painkillers to, cut down on the inflammation to make it easier to reduce the overall pain. I just forget to do that. But long story short, you gotta count your spoons. Some days I have enough spoons for things, some days I don't. And I'm hoping that I am miscounting tonight, because I really like paper cuts. I enjoy reading for y'all. Uh, I haven't tried a lot of topical pain creams. Uh, but maybe, but that might be worth investigating because they might have different active ingredients. I do have like a little plug-in electric heat mat that I use for my low back and my wrists, which is nice because like I get a lot of pain, in my forearms because I'm typing 8 hours a day. In my forearms and my wrists and my fingers, especially as I'm like, haha, I want to I want to embroider things, and I'm doing very fine detail work with my hands after typing for 8 hours. Which probably isn't the best for me, but it's fun. I enjoy it, and I am stopping when it is unpleasant usually. But yeah, I should be better about using my little heat mat to toast my wrists. But I haven't thought about like a do I have carpal tunnel? I don't think it's actual carpal tunnel because like actual carpal tunnel, it does a thing when you do this. Like if you do this thing that I'm doing, like you put your hands together and then like put them at about shoulder height, it compresses the carpal tendons, and so then that makes it worse, or it makes your hands go numb. But when I do that, it doesn't do that. So if I do have a like tissue tunnel issue, it is not the carpal tunnel, but a different tunnel in my arm. It's usually honestly just the muscles in my forearms, like right here and right here, rather than like in the carpals. Because it's like your metacarpals are controlled by the carpal tendons here. The things that like people mistake for veins, like right here in the middle of your wrist. Like the inflammation of that tunnel is what causes carpal tunnel syndrome. And so I'm pretty sure it's not that because it doesn't respond to typical carpal tunnel tests in any form or fashion. I think it's just good old fashioned muscle soreness. Just because I'm doing all that typing all day and then doing other fine detail work with my hands. I'm just a fragile little orchid man is all. Oh, Magnus, you got your sneezes? Did you get your little sneezes out, BB? I think you did. Okay. Where was I? Oh yeah, they just got shot with a disintegrator gun, and they're very lucky they didn't lose some part of their body. A hoarse cry from Hackett. The creatures had reached him, grasped him at the edge of the reeds. Norman swerved in his floating leap to strike the struggling flyer and frogman. The scene whirled around him as he fought them, great paws reaching for him. With a sick, frantic rage, he felt his clenched fist drive against cold, green, billowy bodies. Croaking cries sounded in his ears. Then he and Hackett were jerked to their feet, held tightly by four of the creatures. My God, Norman! What are these frog things? Steady, Hackett. They're the people of the second satellite, it seems. Wait! One of the armed frogmen approached, inspected them, then croaked an order in a deep voice. Then, still holding the two tightly, the party of monsters began to move along the slope, skirting the sea's edge. In a few minutes they reached two curious objects resting on the slope. They seemed long black metal boats, slender and with sharp prow and stern. A compact mechanism and control board filled the prow, while at the stern and sides there were long tubes mounted on swivels like machine guns. The frogmen motioned Norman and Hackett into one, fastening the two prisoners and themselves into their seats, with metal straps provided for that purpose. Four had entered the one boat, the others held that of the captive. One of the prow moved his paws over the control board, and with a purring of power the boat, followed by the other, rose smoothly into the air. It headed out over the gray-green sea, land dropping quickly from sight behind, the horizons water-bounded on all sides. From their nearness, Norman guessed that this second satellite of Earth's was indeed small beside its mother planet. He had to look up to Earth's great gray sphere overhead to attain a sense of reality. Hackett was whispering beside him, the frogmen watchful. Norman, it's not real. It can't be real. These things, these boats, they're intelligent like men. The other thought to steady him. It's a different world, Hackett. Gravitation different, light different, everything different. Evolution here has led a different course. On Earth, men evolved to be the most intelligent life forms, but here it seems like the frogs have taken that spot. But where are they taking us? Could we ever find the plane again? God knows. If we ever get away from these things, we might. We've got to find Fellows, too. Wonder where he is in this world. You have way too much info about nerves and chronic pain things, but I like to try and help where I can because I know how much it can suck. I have definitely recommend icing your back as well as the heat therapy. I think last time I heard Voltaren became over the counter in the States. It's one of the only anti-inflammatories that works well for me. I appreciate your advice. Normally it's kind of like iffy to give somebody medical advice, but like, if you've got experience with it too, I'll have to look into like topical pain creams. Let me write that down. Voltaren. Because it would be nice to have more spoons, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I'm getting by, I'm fine. But it'd be nice to have less pain, you know, considering the average person experiences zero pain and I'm at like a two most days. You know, in the sense of like it is impeding me from my hobbies, but not my work or maintaining my house. You know what I mean? It's an inconvenience rather than like, oh man, I am out of it today. You know, I am like I only have like you know 4 or 5 like I'm having trouble paying attention to my work because of the nonsense my body is throwing me on like really bad days. I'm very fortunate to be honest. It's relatively not. Anyway, where would I put this? I have like a little Discord. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's like it's so annoying because you're like you have all these things in your head like, oh man, I'd love to do these things, but like, and then you go to do them and your body's like, hey, don't do that, and you're like, oh. But I have like a little Discord, right, that I keep all of my personal notes in to keep them organized. Voltaren. Voltaren and or other topical pain relief for low back and hips. I appreciate it. Uh, no, I can dig it up from that brand name. I appreciate it though. Spunky Heart has brought up a good point though. There is a Discord if you dear listener would like to have opinions about the books we're reading or you know talk about weird little projects you've been working on or even see such exclusive things as the inside of my weekly loaf of bread or occasionally me editing a video or a podcast or working on categorizing my analog media as it comes into the computer. You know, just little this and that tasks. If you are interested in seeing any of that, I do that every now and again in Discord. I don't tend to announce when I go live in the Discord, but every now and again I will hop in the general voice chat. I think it's called Void Screaming. No, there's a Void Screaming chat and then there's a vocal general. And I'll occasionally hop in general and just start working on something. Just hang out. So if you'd like to have some feelings on the books we're reading, uh, there's a whole Paper Cuts channel. You know, tell me what books you liked. Tell me what books you didn't like. If you have any public domain books you'd like to suggest to me, I'm happy to hear your suggestions. While I'm at it promoting things, I also have a YouTube channel. If you ever miss a stream, it'll take a little bit to get up there. I'm a little behind on editing VODs, but I've got a YouTube channel where I post my stream VODs. I've got some ideas half finished lying around in my computer that I'd love to actually finish. I've got, you know, it's where all my video stuff goes. Oh, and I keep mentioning, oh yeah, this is a podcast. This is a podcast. If you're new here, you might not know what we're doing tonight is the Paper Cuts podcast. We're essentially recording live, and then these live recordings are edited down into the podcast feed. And I don't know about you, I actually really like podcasts. And there's oodles of content just on the podcast feed alone. There are, ooh, how far are we into posting episodes? I think we're up to like 37. Ooh, yeah. The podcast feed's up to 37. 37 episodes in season 2 out of 48. And we also have the first season of the podcast, which is 60 episodes. So just kind of scroll that podcast feed if you want more to listen to. Pick a book you like. I like to suggest Dracula because it's a really fun one. It's a little higher production. But other big hits you might know: 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, both the original and Through the Looking Glass Mind. Um, What else? We've done some Jules Verne alongside 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think we did The First Men in the Moon. That was a fun one. What else? We've done plenty of H.G. Wells. We did The War of the Worlds is actually the first episode of the podcast because this was originally a radio show. What else? We have I think up to either June or July issues of Astounding Stories. What we're reading right now. Uh, we did we did all those on stream at various times. I may need to go back and rename the season one episodes. Those might be it might be in the subtitle, which tends to get ignored by your favorite podcatcher. But the website is not your only avenue to paper cuts. It also is available on your favorite podcatcher. I tend to suggest Spotify because I'm an Android user who also rents my music. I've also heard good things about Castbox and Stitcher. Um, it used to be actually Google Play Music was a super good way to listen to your podcasts, but Google killed that, and I'm mad about it forever. Anyway, I could go on. I won't, though. For many minutes, the two boats raced on at great speed over the endless waters before the watery skyline was broken far ahead by something dark and unmoving. Hackett and Norman peered with intense interest toward it. It seemed at first a giant, squat mountain rising from the sea, but as they shot nearer, they saw that its outline was too regular, and that colossal as it was in size, it was the work of intelligence. They gasped as they came nearer and got a better view of it. For it was a gigantic dome of black metal, rising sheer from the lonely sea, 10 miles, if anything, in diameter, a third that at its greatest heights. There was no gate or window or opening of any kind in it, just the colossal, smooth, black dome rearing from the watery plain. Yet the two boats were flashing lower toward it. They can't be going inside. There's no way in. What could be in there? The whole thing's mad. There's some way they're slowing. The flying boats were indeed slowing as they dipped lower. They were very near the dome now, its curving wall a looming sky-high barrier before them. Suddenly the boats dipped sharply downward toward the green sea. Before the two flyers could comprehend their purpose, could do aught more than draw instinctive great breaths in preparation, the two crafts had shot down into the waters and were arrowing down and down and down through the green depths. Blinded, flung against this metal strap by the resistance of the waters they ripped through, Norman yet retained enough of consciousness to glimpse beams of light that stabbed ahead from the prows of their rushing boats, to see vaguely strange creatures of the deep blundering in and out of those beams as the boats hurtled forward. The water that forced its way between his lips was fresh, he was vaguely aware, and even as he fought to hold his breath, he was aware, too, that the frogmen seemed in no way incommoded by the sudden transition of the water, their amphibian nature allowing them to stay under far longer than any human could do. The boats ripped through the waters at terrific speed. In a few seconds there loomed before them the giant metal wall of the great dome, going down to the depths here. Norman glimpsed vaguely that the whole colossal dome rested on a vast pedestal-like mountain of rock that rose from the sea floor almost to the surface. Then a great round opening in the wall. The boats flashed into it and were hurtling along a water-filled tunnel. Norman felt his lungs near bursting when the tunnel turned sharply upward, and the boats whizzed up and abruptly out of the water tunnel into air. But it was not the open air again. They were beneath the gigantic dome. For as Norman and Hackett breathed deep, awe fell on their faces as they took in the scene. Far overhead stretched the dome's colossally curving roof, and far out on all sides. It was lit beneath that roof by a clear light that the two would have sworn was sunlight. The dome was in effect the roof of a gigantic illuminated building, and upon its floor there stretched a mighty city. The city of the frogmen. Their boats were rising up over it, and Norman and Hackett saw it clear. Square mile upon square mile of structures stretched beneath the dome, black buildings often of immense size, varying in shape, but all of square rectangular proportions. Between them moved countless frog hordes, swirling throngs in streets and squares, and over the roofs darted thick swarms of flying boats. And at the city's center, in a great circular clear space, lay a wide, round, green pool, the opening of the water tunnel up through which they had come. Norman pointed down toward it. There's your answer. The only entrance to this frog city is up from the sea, through the water tunnel. Good God, an amphibian city! Hackett was shaken and white-faced. The two boats were driving quickly through the city, or rather over the city, through the swarming craft. Norman glimpsed towering buildings that might have been palaces, temples, laboratories. They slowed and dipped toward one block-like building not far from the water tunnel's opening. Armed frog guards were on its roof, and other boats rested there. The two came to rest, and the two captives were jerked out, the guards seizing them. Half dragged and half floating, they were led toward an opening in the roof, from which a stair led downward. They passed down thus into the building's interior, lit by many windows. Norman glimpsed long halls ending in barred doors, guards here and there. Tube lines ran along the walls, and somewhere machines were throbbing dully. They came at last to a barred door whose guard opened it at the croaking order of the frogmen who held the tube, and they were thrust inside as the door clanged. They turned and exclaimed in amazement. The room held fully 100 men. They were men as such the two flyers had never seen before, like humans, except their skins were a light green instead of the normal white and pink. They were dressed in short, dark tunics, and kept talking to each other in a tongue quite unintelligible to Norman and Hackett. They came closer, flocking curiously around the two men with a babble of voices quite meaningless to the two. Then one of the men uttered an exclamation, and all of them turned. The barred door had swung open, and a half-dozen frog guards entered, followed by two frogmen carrying a square little mechanism from which tubing led back out through the door. Norman, these men, if there are these men in the world too, it may be that... Quiet, Hackett. Look at what they're doing. The two frogmen had set their mechanism in place, then croaked out a brief word of order. Suddenly, slowly, reluctantly, one of the green men moved toward them. Quickly they removed a metal disc fastened to his arm, exposing a small orifice like an unhealed wound. Onto this they fastened a sucker-like object, from which a transparent tube led back through the mechanism. The machine hummed, and at once a red stream pulsed through the tube and back through the mechanism. The man to whom it was attached was growing rapidly pale. Norman, sick with horror, clenched his companion. Hackett, these frogmen are sucking the blood from him. Good Lord, and look at that. They're doing that with another one. All of these men kept prisoners to furnish them with blood. Must be the damn creature's food, and here we are with the others. A common horror shook the two. It did not seem to affect the green men in the room, though, who advanced to the mechanism one by one with a reluctant air, as of cows unwilling to be milked. Each was attached to the mechanism by a sucking disc on his arm, and out of each the blood poured through the tube. The metal disc was replaced on his arm then, and he went back to the others. Norman saw that the frogmen only took from each an amount of blood they could lose and yet live, since, though they came back pale and weak from the mechanism, they were able to walk. It must be their food, human blood. They may have thousands on thousands of humans penned up like this, like so many herds of cows. Perhaps they live entirely on the lifeblood which they milk from them. Human cows, good heavens. Norman, look, they're calling to us. The two stiffened. All the others in the room had taken their turn at the blood-sucking mechanism, and now the frogmen croaked their order to the two flyers. They had forgotten their own predicament in the horror of the scene, but it now became real to them. They backed against the room's wall, quivering, dangerous. One moment. I'm gonna get up and stretch a little, see once if that wakes me up a bit. If I can find the thing. Oh, okay. I got up, I did a little stretch, I did a little walk around. Hopefully that holds me over. Ah, yes, the predicament they were in. The frog guards came forward to drag them to the machine. A webbed paw was outstretched, but Hackett, with a wild blow, drove the frogman back and downward. The frog guards leapt, and Norman and Hackett struck them back with all the greater strength the lesser gravitation gave them. The room was in an uproar, the green men shouting hoarsely and seeming on the point of rushing to their aid. But the menacing force pistols of the other frog guards held back the shouting men, and in moments the two flyers were overpowered. Hang on, the book window moved. Sorry. Ah, yes. But the menacing force pistols of the other frog guards held back the shouting men, and in moments the two flyers were overpowered by the sheer weight of frog bodies. Norman felt himself dragged to the machine. Pain needled his upper arm as an incision was made. He felt the sucking disc attached. Then, as the machine hummed, and a sickening nausea swept over him, the blood drained from his body. Held tightly by the guards, he went dizzy and weak, but at last he felt the sucker removed and a metal disc fastened over the incision. He was jerked aside, and Hackett, his face deathly white, was dragged into his place. In a moment, some of the latter's blood had also been pumped from him also. The machine being withdrawn, Norman and Hackett were released, and frogmen, with their black force pistols watchfully raised, withdrew, the door clanging. The room settled back to quietness, the green men stretching in lassitude on the metal bunks around it. The two flyers crouched down near the floor, shuddering nausea and weakness still holding them. Norman found that Hackett was laughing weakly. To think that 24 hours ago, I was in New York, on Earth. He half laughed and half sobbed. The other gripped his arm. It's horrible, Hackett, I know, but it isn't instant death. We've still got a chance to escape. Can these frog men keep us here? Where's your nerve, man? A voice beside them made them turn in amazement. You are men from Earth? It asked in strangely accented English. From Earth? Astonishment held them as they saw who spoke. It was one of the green men in the room, who settled down by their side. A tall figure with superb muscles and frank, clean countenance. His dark eyes were afire with eagerness. English. You know English. You understand me? The other showed his teeth in a smile. I know, yes. I'm Sarah, and I learned to speak it from Thalas in my city before the Ralas caught me. Thalas, Norman repeated, puzzled. Then suddenly he brightened. My God, he means Fellows. Fellows, yes. From the sky he fell into our city in a strange flying boat that was smashed. He was hurt, but we cared for him, and he taught me his speech, which I heard you talking now. Then Fellows is in your city now? Where is that? Across this sea, back in the hills. It is far from the sea, but I was rash one day, came too near the water in my flying boat. The the Ralas were out raiding and they saw me, caught me, they brought me here. No escape until I die. Speaking of raiding, hello, raiders from Alternate. How was Splatfest? How was Splatoween? How'd the rest of that go? I saw you were like winning some 10x battles when I had to bail to come over here and read. While we wait for Altier to reply, welcome, Raiders. Welcome. It's true. 2 satellites. We only. That's fair. We only got one, but always glad to have you here, Raiders. My name is Glacier Nestor. It's true. Uh, it's true. I read books. I also occasionally do Tuesday streams where I do more Twitch appropriate things. Most people don't jump up on Twitch and read, I'll tell you that much. I know my automod is so picky. I let it through because that's not egregious to me, but I need to dial in the permitted terms for my automod. It is not a big deal for someone to say Lamau. You know what I mean? But very glad to have you all here from the alternate realms. Hopefully, Alternate carved you open a very comfortable portal to get over here. Alternate, for context, everyone, is a half-demon VTuber who lives in a place called the Alternate Realms. Shout out Alternate, because he's cool. Book's good, says the man who doesn't read. I've activated a shout out. It's a built-in function of Twitch. Now, the chat, at the top of the chat, there's a heart button that you can press with your finger or your mouse and follow Alternate because he's very cool. Yeah, Alternate's a really great guy. VTuber, half demon. I already said all that. The Alternate Realms, a place of many doors and many worlds. And so we see many places over there. A lot of variety, if you will. I really enjoy showing up in Alter's chat regardless of what game's happening. What else was happening over there? You were doing Xenoblade? You're still cleaning up, like, side quests after the end of Xenoblade 2? Or was it Xenoblade 3? Yeah, it's Xenoblade 3 because you haven't gotten to the first Xenoblade on stream yet. You're cleaning up side quests on Xenoblade 3. We were Splatfest tonight. What else have we done recently over there? Fire Emblem Heroes relatively recently. I'm still trying to talk him into doing, ooh, yeah, that's true, there is DLC for you to do. I'm still trying to talk him into doing some like. Oh yeah, we did Sonk. I forgot about Sonk. Sonk the Hedge. Uh, I still keep trying to talk him into doing some solo tabletop games because that's what I like to do on Tuesday. But you know, it's not for everybody. You can't. Not everyone can improvise to a camera. I still think he would have a great time, but that's just me. Need to squeeze the Sonk back into the sketch. It's true. Squash that man in there. Pick up the rings. Feed them to him. He'll fit. I promise. Um. Oh man, my brain's melting. Did I hit all of the things that I do, or did I got distracted by telling you all how cool alternate is? Um, yeah, I read Friday nights. Every Friday night at 7 Pacific. 7 Pacific, which you will have to convert to your local time. I used to do 8 Pacific. I used to do 8 local, but then my job decided. Um, then my job decided, no, you get to wake up at 6 a.m. So now we've moved to 7 o'clock, which is still, you know, late-ish on a Friday night. But you know, I digress. Friday evenings, we read books around here, and Tuesday evenings we play games, whether that be physical tabletop games. We just played some Hanafuda with Raz last Tuesday. That was fun. Or you know, solo tabletop games where we kind of improvise a story as we go. I'm working on improving my table cam setup so we can do some more map drawing based games. I have a couple map drawing games sitting on the shelf that I really want to do like at least one episode on stream, and then maybe use them to build more. Like I'm looking to build spaceships for a still fleet campaign that I'm writing. Still spaceships and planets and stuff like that. Although really, what I should do is I shouldn't build any planets because there's a lot of lore in that game already. Although honestly, a Monster of the Week type game, if we picked up Monster of the Week, we could do kind of a Stargate-y kind of game based on some of the stories we've been reading here. That that would be a fun actual play, honestly, if I could get a table together for that. Don't you love when I have ideas live? Let's keep reading before I get distracted for an entire 2 hours like last week. Long story short, Altier neat. I suggest you follow him. He's great. Anyway, fellas is in your city now. No escape till I die. Yes, that's where we were. The Ralas. You mean these frogmen? Of course. They are the tyrants and oppressors of this world. Our little world is but a tenth or less the side of your great earth which it circles, but it has its lands and rivers, and this one great freshwater sea which into the latter empty. In this sea long ago developed the Ralas, the great frogmen who have acquired such intelligence and arts that they became such lords of this world. Through the centuries, while on the land our races of green men have been struggling upwards, the Ralas have oppressed them. Long ago the Ralas left all their other cities to build this one great amphibian city at the sea's center. Entrance to it is only by the water tunnel from without, and being frog people, entrance thus is easy for them, since they can move for many minutes under water, though they drown like any other breathing animal if kept under too long. Humans dare not try to enter it thus by the water tunnel, since before they could find it and make the way up through it, they would have drowned. And so the Rawls have ruled from this impregnable amphibian city, Its colossal dome is invulnerable to ordinary attack, and uh, and though solid and without openings, it is always as light beneath the dome as here outside. Since the Rollis' scientists contrived light condensers and conductors that catch light outside and bring it in to release inside. So when it's day outside, the sunshine is bright here, and when the night comes, the earth light shines here the same as without. From this city, the raiding parties have gone out endlessly to swoop down on the cities of us green men. Since we learned to make flying boats like theirs with molecular motors, and to make the guns like theirs that fire shells filled with annihilating force, we have resisted them stoutly, but their raids have not ceased, and always they have brought their prisoners back to this city, their city. Tens of thousands of green men have been imprisoned here like us, for the sole purpose of supplying them with blood. For the Ralas live on this blood alone, changing it chemically to fit their own bodies, and then taking it into their bodies. It eliminates all necessity for food here for them. Every few days they drain blood from us, and since we are well fed and cared for, to keep us good blood producers, we will be here a long time before we die. But haven't you made any attempt to get out of here? To escape? Sarja smiled. Who could escape the city of the Ralas? In all recorded city history, it has never been done. Or even if by some miracle you got a flying boat, the opening of the water tunnel that leads outward is guarded always. Gods or no gods, we're going to try it, and not just sit here to furnish blood for the Ralas. Are you willing to help us to try and get fellows in your city? The Green Man considered this for a bit. It is hopeless, but as well to die beneath the force shells of the Ralas as live out a lifetime here. Yes, I will help, though I cannot see how you expect to escape from even this room. I think we can manage that. But first, not a word to these others. We can't hope to escape with them all. There's no knowing what one might not betray us to the frogmen. He went on then to outline the other two that the idea that had come to him. Both had exclaimed at the simpleness of the idea, though Sarger somewhat remained doubtful. While Hackett slept, weak still from the loss of his blood, Norman had the Green Man scratch on the metal floor, as well as possible, a crude map of the satellite's surface, and found that the city where Fellows was seemed some hundreds of miles back from the sea. While they talked, the sunlight, apparently sourceless, that came through the heavy barred windows of the room faded rapidly, and the dusk settled over the great amphibian city beneath the giant dome, kept from total darkness by a silvery pervading light that Norman reflected must be the light from Earth's great sphere. With the dusk's coming, the activities in the frog city lessened greatly. With dusk, too, frog guards entered the room bearing long metal troughs filled with a red jelly-like substance that they placed on racks along the wall. As the guards withdrew, the men in the room rushed toward the troughs, elbowing each other aside and striking each other to scoop up and eat as much of the red jelly as possible. It was for all the world like the feeding of some farm animals, and Hackett and Norman sickened so at the sight that they had no heart to try the food. Sarja, though, had no such scruples, and seemed to make a hearty meal at one of the troughs. After the meal, the green men sought the bunks, and soon were stretched in sonorous slumber. It was, Norman reflected, exactly to the existence of domesticated animals, to eat and sleep and give food to their masters. A deeper horror of the frogmen shook him, and a deeper determination to escape them. He waited until all in the room were sleeping before beckoning to Sarja and Hackett. Quiet now. If the others wake, they'll make such a clamor we won't have a chance in the world. Are you ready, Sarja? Yes, though I think such a thing's impossible. Probably is, but it's the one chance we've got. The immensely greater strength of our earth muscle that the frogmen must have forgotten when they put us in here. They moved silently to the room's great barred door, outside which a frog guard paced. They waited until he had passed the door and on down the hall. Then Norman and Hackett and Sarja grasped together one of the door's vertical bars. It was an inch and a half in thickness of solid metal, and it seemed ridiculous that any men could bend it through the sheer strength of their muscles. Norman, though, was relying on the fact that on the second satellite, with its far lesser gravitational influence, their earth muscles gave them enormous strength. He grasped the bar, Hackett and Sarjas gripping it below him, and then, at a whispered word, they pulled with all their force. The bar resisted, and again, with sweat starting on their foreheads, they pulled. It gave, just a little. They shrank back from it as the guard returned, moving past. Then, grasping the bar again, they bent all their force once more upon it. Each effort saw it bending more, the opening of the door's bars widening. They gave a final great wrench, and the bent bar squealed a little. They shrank back, appalled, but apparently the guard had not heard or noticed. He moved past it on his return through the hall, and no sooner was past it than Norman squeezed through the opening and leapt silently for the great frogman's back. It went down with a wild flurry of waving webbed paws and croaking cries, stilled almost instantly by Norman's terrific blows. There was silence then as Hackett and Sarja squeezed out after him, the momentary clamor of battle having aroused no suspicions. The three leapt together toward the stairs. In two great floating steps they were on the floor above, Hackett and Norman dragging Sarja between them. They were not seen, they were sailing in giant steps up another stair, hopes rising high. The last stair, the roof opening above, and then from beneath a giant croaking cry swelled instantly into the chorus of an alarmed shout. They found the door, the guard. They were bursting out on the roof. Frog guards were in it, who came in a hopping rush toward them, force pistols raised. But a giant leap took Hackett among them, to amaze them for a moment with great flailing blows. Sarja had leapt for the nearest flying boat resting on the roof, and was calling in a frantic voice to Norman and Hackett. Norman was turning toward Hackett, the center of a wild combat, but the latter had emerged from it for a brief second to motion him frantically back. "It's no use, Norman. Get away! Get away!" "Hackett, for God's sake!" Norman half leapt to the other, but an arm caught him, pulling him desperately onto the boat's surface. It was Sarja, the long craft flying over the roof beneath his control. "They come. Too late now." Frogmen were pouring up onto the roof from below. Sarja sent the craft rocketing upward as Hackett gestured them away for a last frantic time before going down beneath the frogmen's onslaught. "Not Hackett! They got Hackett!" "Can't believe they'd do that to him." The roof, and their combat on it, dropped back and beneath them like a stone as their craft rippled across the silvery dusk over the mighty frog city. They were shooting toward the city's center, toward the green pool that was the entrance to the water tunnel, while behind and beneath an increasing clamor of alarm spread swiftly. Norman raged futilely. "Hackett, Hackett, we can't leave him." "Too late. We cannot help him, but only be captured again. We escape now and come back. Come back." The truth of it pierced Norman's brain even in that wild moment. Hackett had fought and held back the frog guards only that they might escape. He shouted suddenly, "Sarja, the water tunnel." A half-dozen boats with frog guards were on them, and rising round in answer to the alarm. "The force gun beside you." Norman whirled, glimpsed the long tube on the swivel beside him, trained it on the boats rising ahead as they rocketed nearer. He fumbled frantically to catch at the gun's rear, then felt a stream of shells flicking out of it. Two of the boats ahead vanished as the shells released their annihilating force. Another sagged and fell. From the remaining three, invisible force shells flicked around them, but in an instant, Sarja had whirled the boat through them and was down into the water tunnel. Norman clung desperately to his seat as the boat flashed through the water, and then, as Sarja sent it flying out through the great tunnel's waters, glimpsed close behind the beams of the three Rala boats as they pursued them through the tunnel, overtaking them. Could the force shells be fired underwater? Sorry, there was a bird and it was making a perfect noise for this. I was like, what is happening? Could the force shells be fired underwater? Norman didn't know, but desperately he swung the force gun back as they rushed through the waters and pressed the catch. An instant later, beams and boats behind them in the tunnel vanished. His lungs were afire. It seemed that he must open them to the strangling water. The boat was ripping the waters at such tremendous speed, he felt himself being torn from his hold on it. Pain seemed poured like molten metal through his chest. He could pull out no longer, and then the boat stabbed up from the waters into clear air. Norman panted and sobbed. Behind them rose the colossal metal dome of the Frog City, gleaming dully in the silvery light that flooded the far-stretching seas. That light poured down from a stupendous silver crescent in the night skies. Norman saw it dully, as a little hysterically. The dark outlines on it made him remember Earth. Sarja was driving the flying boat out over the sea and back away from the Frog City at an enormous speed. At last he glanced back, for far behind them lay the great dome, and up and around it were gleaming lights. The lights of pursuing Rollins. We escaped to the city of Ralas, from which none ever before escaped. Remembrance spoke Norman. Hackett, hold off the frogmen so we can get away. We'll come back for him then. We come back with all the green men of the world to raid the Ralas city. Yes, I know what Phallus has planned. Can you find your way to your city? Sarja nodded, looking upward. Before the next sun has come and gone, we can reach it. Oh, the book is making me sleepy. It's supposed to be making you guys sleepy, not me. Oh. How much of this is left? Oh, well, yeah, we could probably make that if I press on. City the boat flew on. Yes. Yeah, we can make that. We can make that. I just need to wake up. Excuse me. The boat flew onward, and the great dome and the searching lights around it dropped beneath the horizon. Norman felt the warm wind drying his drenched garments as they rushed onward. Crouched on the boat, he gazed up toward the silver crescent of Earth, sinking toward the horizon ahead. This meant, he told himself, that the satellite turned slowly on its axis as it whirled around Earth. And in this thinking it came to him that its night and day periods must be highly irregular. When the sun climbed from the waters behind them, they were flying still over a boundless waste of waters, but soon they sighted on the horizon ahead the thin green line of land. to recline a little bit here. Back is being so mean, so rude to me tonight. Thin green line of land. Sarja slowed as they reached it, took his bearings, and sent the craft flying onward. They passed over a green coastal plain, and then over low hills, joined in long chains and mantled by dense and mighty jungles, towering green growths of unfamiliar appearance to Norman. He thought he glimpsed more than once huge beast-like forms moving in them. He did see twice in the jungles great clearings where there were fair-sized cities of bright green buildings, a metal tower rising from each, but when he pointed to them, Sarja just shook his head. At last, as they passed over another range of hills and came into sight of a third green city with its looming tower, the other pointed, his face alight. One moment, I'm checking. Oh, this is fine. My city, fellas there. Fellows. Norman's heart beat faster. They shot closer and lower, and he saw that the buildings were obviously green to lend them a certain protective coloration similar to that of the green jungles around them. The tower with a surmounting cage puzzled him, though. But before he could ask Sarja concerning it, his answer came in a different way. A long metal tube poked slowly out of the cage on the tower's top and sent a hail of force shells flicking around them. They're firing on us. This can't be your city. They see our black boat. They think we're Rala raiders, and unless we let them know, they'll shoot us out of the air. Stand up, wave to them. Both Norman and Sarja sprang to their feet and waved wildly to those in the tower cage, their flying boat drifting slowly forward. Instantly the force cells ceased to hail toward them, and as they moved nearer, a siren-like signal broke from the cage. At once, scores of flying boats, like their own, but glittering metal instead of black, shot up from the city where they had lain until now and surrounded them. As Sarja called in his own tongue to them, the green men on the surrounding boats broke into resounding cries. They shot down toward the city, Norman gazing tensely. Great crowds of green men in their dark tunics had swarmed out into the streets for the passing of the alarm, and their craft and the others, which came to rest in an open square like that, was the junction of several streets. The green men that crowded excitedly about Norman and Sarja gave way to a half-dozen hurrying into the square from the greatest of the buildings facing one. All but one were green men like the others, but that one, the laughing eye, tanned face, the worn brown clothing, the curious huge steps with which he came, Norman's heart leapt. Fellows? Good God. Norman? The other's face was thunderstruck. Norman, how by all the toll did you get here? Norman, mind and body strained to the breaking point, was incoherent. We guessed how you'd gone. The second satellite. Fellows, Hackett and I came after you to be taken to that frog city. As Norman choked out the tale, Fellows' face was study. When it was finished, he swallowed and gripped Norman's hand viciously. And you and Hackett figured it out and just came after me? Look at the risks you took. Crazy to get here. It really is. Fellows, Hackett's still there. Let's see if he's still alive in the Rala city. lost my place. Norman, mind and body strained to the breaking point, was incoherent. Guessed how do you... We guessed how you'd gone. The second satellite fellows, Hackett and I, came after you, taken to that frog city. As Norman choked out the tale, Fellows' face was a study, and when it was finished, he swallowed and gripped Norman's hand, vice-like. You and Hackett figured it out, came after me, took that risk. It's crazy, both of yous. Crazy. Fellows, Hackett's still there, if he's alive, in the Raleigh city. Fellows' voice was grim, quick. We'll have him out, Norman, if he still lives, and living or dead, the Raleighs will pay soon for this, and for all they've done upon this world in ages. Their time nears, I'll tell you that much. He led Norman, excited throngs of green men about them, into the great building from which he had emerged. There were big rooms inside, workshops and laboratories that Norman but vaguely glimpsed in passing. The room to which the other led him was one with a long metal couch. Norman stretched protestingly upon it at the other's bidding, and drifted off almost at once into sleep. He woke to find the sunlight that had filled the room gone, and replaced by the silvery earth light. From the window he saw the silver-lit city outside would now hold tremendous activity. Immense hordes of green men surging through it with masses of weapons and equipment, flying boats, pouring down out of the night from all directions. He turned to the fellow. He turned at the room of the door when it clicked open behind him. It was his old friend Phillips. Thought you'd be awake by now, Norman. You feeling fit? As though I'd slept weak, Norman said, and the other laughed his old carefree laugh. Well, you almost have at that. 2 days and nights you've slept, but it all adds up to hardly more than a dozen hours. This world, Norman's voice still held all his incredulity. To think that we should be on a second satellite of Earth, it almost seems beyond belief. Sometimes it seems to me too, Bella said thoughtfully. But it's not a bad world, just the human part of it, for least. But it's not a bad world, not the human part of it, at least. When the satellite's atmosphere caught me and pitchforked me down, among these green men... When this satellite's atmosphere caught me and pitchforked me down among them green men, smashing the plane and almost myself, they took care of me. You say 3 others vanished as I did? I haven't heard any of them here. They must have crashed into one of the jungles. Of course, I'd have got back to Earth on one of them flying boats if I'd seen abs. But their molecular power won't take for them far from this world's surface, so I don't suppose I could have visited. As it was, the green men cared for me, and when I found new strength... Tell you what, gang. I need to take a BRB. I am profoundly sleepy. I'm trying so hard, but I keep losing my place. I'm like, oh no, we can make it through this story before the break. No. I'm dozing off. here on the couch. That won't do. So let's switch over to the Be Right Back screen, and we will indeed be right back. Music choice this evening, I think I'm gonna go with... Oh. Oh, do I got anything spooky? That's a good question. Music... Not super sure. I've got a lot I could do that's... I've got spooky music, but I don't know that I've got spooky music that wouldn't get me dinged. So I guess we'll listen to the Whitebird School's concert band. And that will be our BRB music. I'll be back in about 15 minutes. I'll be back in about 15 minutes. Get up, stretch, that's drink my water, that whole thing. Maybe try and wake up a little bit. Okay, I am back. Hopefully, you enjoyed the musical stylings of some random high school concert band. um, I had myself a nice little persimmon, and that was my snack. Before we jump back in and get restarted here, you see the little logo above my head, the little Codex logo? That's because there's a whole other group of reading streamers. That's the Twitch team I'm on. We all we all do reading streams, and we're all pretty cool. If you like what I do, but you don't necessarily care for the genre of story I pick very often, you will like other people in the Codex. I will put it that way. There's usually monthly book clubs. They're on hold while Jeffrey, Jeffrey of Jeffrey's Web, gets settled in his new position. But once he has settled in, he's willing to organize the community again. Personally, I think we should organize around more than just book club, much as I like book club. So one of these times I'll remember to pitch writing workshop to some people. But anyhow, where were we? Oh, of course, as soon as I sit back down, my knee and my back are killing me. Anyway, last we left off, um, we cut off in the middle of a story because I was getting too sleepy. And hopefully we can, now having remedied that a little bit, we can resume here. Oh yeah, we just met Fellows, the guy who got kidnapped by the second satellite previously. Well, sometimes it seems so to me. Oh, what this guy was Southern, wasn't he? Well, sometimes it seems so to me too, but it's not a bad world, not the human part of it, at least. When this satellite's atmosphere caught me and pitchforked me down among these green men, smashing the plane, and almost myself for that matter, well, they took care of me. You say 3 others vanished as I did. I never heard of them here. They must have crashed into the sea or jungles. Of course, I'd have got back to the Earth on one of them flying boats if I'd have been able, but their molecular power won't take 'em far from this world's surface, so I couldn't. As it was, the green men cared for me when I found out how them frogmen have dominated this world for ages. The city of the Rylus has spread endless terror among the humans here. I resolved to smash those monsters, whatever I did. Taught some of the green men like Sarge my own speech, later on learning theirs, and in the weeks I've been here, I've been working out a way to smash them there Rylus. You know that amphibian city's almost impregnable. Humans can hardly live long enough under the water to get into it, let alone fight underwater like them frogmen can. To meet with them on... Excuse me, library. No more pets for you. Yeah, well, you can be nice all you like. You bat at my hand, you don't get any more pets. Where was I? To meet them on even terms, green men need diving helmets with an oxygen supply. They'd never heard of such an idea. Too afraid of the sea to ever really get any experimenting done in it. But I convinced them they've made enough helmets for all their forces. And in those helmets, they can meet the Rylus underwater on equal terms. And there's a chance we can destroy the whole Rylus city with their help. It's built on a giant pedestal of rock, after all, rising from the seafloor. You saw it. And I've had some of them green men make huge force shells, a bit like force bombs, even. Ow! Library! Good heavens! No, you don't get to sit on the couch right now. Go be somewhere else if you're gonna be this mad about things. Yeah, I'm talking to you. You're being mean and rude, and so you don't get to be on the camera. Yeah. You don't get to be mean and rude and then act like you get more pets. It's not the game we play here. Where were we? Force shells, a bit like force bombs, ought to be powerful enough to split the pedestal beneath the city. If we can get a chance to place those bombs, we might smash the frogmen forever on this world, but one thing's for sure, we're gonna get Hackett out if he still lives. Then you're going to attack the Raleigh city now? Fellows nodded grimly. While you've slept, all the forces of the green men on this world have been gathering. Your coming has only precipitated our plans, Norman. The whole soul of the green race has been set on this attack for weeks. Alternate says, Stinky baby. He's just being a little bit of a rude gremlin tonight. Don't eat that either. Friendly reminder, I do technically have affiliate. Not only do I have channel point redeems that are very fun, I also have emotes. My personal favorite emotes are the ones that Raz drew. Just lie down. No more problems. Lie on the couch. Be pretty. Yeah. Lie down on the couch. Yeah, I got emotes. Raz drew a couple of them. Those are the best emotes, really. But I'm also very partial to Scrim. If you want to pay a little extra money, you can also get the Agonies emote. Or if you really want to pay extra money, you can get everybody's favorite chat monster. But, you know, that's just an option. Oh, and if you don't want to pay money, if you have Amazon Prime, you get a free sub once a month. Just that's a thing that Twitch does. You just tie your Amazon account to your Twitch account, and then you just get it for free. Go ahead, do it. Defraud Beef Jesus of his $5. Give me $2. I won't complain. Anyway, the book we're reading. Norman, half bewildered at the swiftness with which events rushed upon him, found himself striding with fellows in great steps out through the building into the great square. It was shadowed now by mass on mass of flying boats, crowded with green men that hung over it and over the streets. One boat, Sarge at its controls, waited on the ground, and as they entered and buckled themselves into the seats, the craft drove up to hang with the others. A shattering cheer greeted them. Norman saw that in the silvery light of Earth's great crescent there, stretched over the city and surrounding jungle, a veritable plain of flying boats. On each were green men, and each bristled with force guns, and had as many great goggled helmets fastened to it as it had occupants. He glimpsed larger boats loaded with huge metal cylinders, the force bombs fellows had mentioned. Fellows rose and spoke briefly in a clear voice to the assembled green men on their craft, and another great shout roared from them, and from these who watched in the city below. Then, as he spoke a word, Sarja sent their craft flying out over the city, and the great mass of boats, fully 1,000 in number, were hurtling in a compact column after them. Fellows leaned over to Norman as the great column of purring craft shot on over the silver-lit jungles. And we'll make straight for the Raleigh city, try settling into it before they understand what's happening. Won't they have guards out? Well, probably. We can beat them back into the city before their whole forces can come out on us. It's the only way in which we can get inside and reach Hackett. While we're attacking, the force bombs can get placed, so I don't reckon we should rely on them too much. If the attack only succeeds in getting us inside, we'll have a chance. Well, it's on the knees of the gods, if you will. These green men are doing an unprecedented thing in attacking the Raleigh masters of this world. Remember, they got ages of oppression to avenge. They'll fight. The fleet flew on. Hills and rivers, a silver-lit panorama. Hills and rivers, a silver. One more try. The fleet flew on. Hills and rivers, a silver-lit panorama unreeling beneath them. Earth's crescent sank behind them, and by the time they flashed out over the great freshwater sea, the sun was rising like a flaming eye from behind it. Land sank from sight behind, and the green men were silent and tense. They saw stretching beneath only the gray waters that for ages had been the base of the dread frogmen, but still the fleet's column raised on. At last the column slowed. Far ahead, the nearest bulge broke the level line where sky and waters meet. The amphibian city of Ross. At Fellows' order, the flying boats sank downward until they moved just above the waters. Another order made that green host don the grotesque helmets. Another order made the green hosts don the grotesque helmets. Norman found that, while cumbersome, their oxygen supply was unfailing. They shot on again at highest speed, but as the gigantic black dome of the Frog City grew in their vision, there darted up from around it suddenly a far-flung swarm of black spots. Rala boats. The muffled exclamation was Fellows's. There needed now no order on his part, though. Like hawks leaping for prey, the fleet of the green men sprang through the air. Norman, clutching the force gun between his knees, had time only to see that the Rala craft were a few hundred in number, and that, contemptuous of the greater odds that had favored these humans they so long oppressed, they were flying straight to meet them. Then the two fleets met, and were spinning side by side above the waters. Norman saw the thing only as a wild whirl of Rala boats up toward and beside them, great green frogmen crowding the craft, their force guns hailing shells. Automatically, with the old air-fighting instinct, his fingers had pressed the catch of the gun between his knees, and as its shells flicked toward the rushing boats, he saw areas of nothingness opening suddenly in their mass, shells striking and exploding in annihilating invisibility there and in their own fleet. The two fleets mingled and merged momentarily, the battle becoming a thing of madness, a huge world of black and glittering flying boats together, striking shells, exploding nothingness about them. The Ralas were fighting like demons. The merged, terrific combat lasted but moments, could last but moments. Norman, his gun's magazine empty, seemed to see the mass of struggling ships splitting, diverging, then saw that the black craft were dropping, plummeting downward toward the waves. The Ralas, stunned by that minute of terrific combat, were fleeing. Muffled cries and cheers came from about him as the glittering flying boats of the green men shot after them. They crashed down into the waters and curved deeply into their green depths toward the gigantic dome. Ahead, the Rala boats were in flight toward their city, and now their pursuers were like sharks striking after them. There in the depths, the force guns of black and glittering boats alike were splitting. Try that again. There in the depths, the force guns of black and glittering boats alike were spitting, and giant waves and underwater convulsions rocked the water about them, as exploding shells annihilated boats about them. The tunnel, its round opening yawned in the looming wall ahead, and Norman saw the Rala craft reduced to scores in number hurtling into it to rouse all the forces of the great amphibian city. Their own boats were flashing into the opening after them. He glimpsed, as he glanced back for a moment, the larger craft with the great force bombs veering aside behind them. It was nightmare in the water tunnel, flashing beams of the craft ahead, and waters that rocked and smashed around them as, in flight, the Ralas still rained back force shells toward them in a chaos of action. Once the frogmen turned to hold them back in the tunnel, but by sheer weight the rushing ships of the green men crashed them onward. Boats were going into nothingness all around them. A part of Norman's brain wondered calmly why they survived, even while another part kept his gun again working with a refilled magazine. Fellows and Sarja were grotesque shapes beside him. Abruptly, the tunnel curved upward, and as they flashed after the remaining Rala craft, their boats ripped up into clean air. They were beneath the giant dome. The frogmen chased inward, spread out in all directions over their mighty, swarming city, and across it a terrific clamor of alarm ran instantly as the green men emerged after them. Norman saw flying boats beginning to rise all across the city, and realized that moments would see all the intense force of the Ralas, that thousands of craft they could muster pouring upon them. He pointed out over the city to a block-like building, and shouted madly through his helmet to Fallows and Sarja, "Hackett, But Sarge had already sent their craft whirling across the city toward the structure, half their fleet behind it, with parts still emerging from the water tunnel. While the boats rose before them, but nothing could stop them now, their force shells raining ahead to clear a path for their meteor flight. They shot down toward the block structure, and Norman, half crazed by now, saw to descend and enter was death in the face of the frog forces rising now all over the city. He cried to fellows. With two of the guns, they swooped lower as they sprayed force shells along the building's side. The shells struck and whiffed away the whole side, exposing the level of the building's interior. Out from it rushed swarms of crazed green men, sweeping aside frogmen guards, while far over the city the invading craft were loosing shells on the block-like buildings that held the prisoners, tens of thousands of them swarming forth. In the throng below they raced madly forth. Norman saw one, and shouted wildly. The one brown-garbed figure looked up, saw that their boat was sweeping. The one brown-garbed figure looked up, saw their boat swooping lower, and leaped for it in a tremendous 40-foot spring that brought his fingers to its edge. Norman pulled him frenziedly up. Norman, in God's name, fellas. A helmet, Hackett. My God, look at those prisoners. Norman! The countless thousands of green men released from the buildings whose walls had vanished under the shells of the invaders had poured forth to make the amphibian city a chaos of madness. Oblivious to all else, they were throwing themselves upon the city's crowding frogmen in a battle whose ferocity was beyond belief, disregarding all else in the supreme chance to wreak vengeance on the monstrous beings who had fed upon their blood. In the incredible insanity of that raging fury, the craft of the green men hanging over the city were all but forgotten. Suddenly, the city and mighty dome over it quivered violently, and then again there came from beneath a dull, vast, grinding roar. The great force bombs, fellows screamed. Oh, Neighbor, are you okay? Did we just have a little hiccups? Those are allowed. Now you set them off. City's sinking. Get out of here for love of God. The boat whirled beneath Sarge's hands toward the pool of the water tunnel, all their fleet rushing with them. The grinding roar was louder, terrible. Dome and city were shaking violently now, but in the insensate fury of their struggle, the frogmen and their released prisoners were hardly aware of it. The whole great dome seemed to be sinking upon them, and the city falling beneath it as Sarge's craft ripped down into the tunnel waters, and then out at awful speed, the great tunnel's walls swaying and sinking around them. They shot out into the green depths from it to hear a dull, colossal crashing through the waters from behind, as the great pedestal of rock on which the city had stood was shattered by the huge force bombs that collapsed. As their boats flashed up into the open air, they saw that the huge dome of the city of Rallis was gone. Beneath them was only a titanic whirlpool of foaming waters, in which only the curved top of the settling dome was visible for a moment, as it sank slowly and ponderously downward, with a roar as of the roar of the falling worlds. Buckling, collapsing, sinking even, it vanished in the foam-wild sea, with all the frogmen who for ages had ruled the second satellite, and with all those prisoners who had at last dragged them down with them to death. Ripping off their helmets, with all the green men shouting crazily about them, Norman and Fellows and Hackett stared down at the colossal maelstrom in the waters that was the tomb of the masters of a world. Then the depression's side collapsed, the waters rushed together, and beneath them was but troubled, tossing sea. Earth's gray ball was overhead again, and the sun was sinking to the horizon when the three soared upward in the long, gleaming plain, its motor roaring. Norman, with Hackett and Fellows crowding the narrow cabin beside him, waved with them through all of its windows. All around them were rising the flying boats of the green men. They were waving wildly, shouting their farewells, Sarge's tall figure erect at the prow of one of the boats. Insistent they had been that the three should stay, the three through whom the monstrous age-old tyranny of the frogmen had been lifted, but earth sickness was on them, and they had flown to where the plain lay still unharmed among the reeds, 100 willing hands dragging it forth for the take-off. The plane soared higher, motor thundering, and they saw the flying boats sinking back from around them. They caught the wave of Sarja's hands still from the highest, and then that too was gone. Upward they flew toward the great gray sphere, their eyes on the dark outlines of its continents, and on one continent in particular. Higher and higher, Greenland and gray water receding beneath them. Hackett and Fellows, intent and eager as Norman kept the plane rising. The satellite lay, a greenish globe, under them, and as they went higher still, a rushing sound came louder to their ears. The edge of the satellite's atmosphere? We're almost to it. Here we go. As he shot the plane higher, great forces smote it, gray earth and green satellite and yellow sun gyrating round it as it reeled and plunged. Then, suddenly enough, it was falling steadily, gray earth and its dark continent now beneath, while with a dwindling, rushing roar, the second satellite whirled away above them, passing and vanishing. Passing as though, to Norman it seemed, all their strange sojourn on as it were in passing. The frogmen in their mighty city, Sarja in their mad flight, the green men in the last terrific battle, all whirling away, whirling away. Historic experiment proves Earth's rotation. The famous experiment which proves that the Earth do move by letting the observer actually see it twisting underneath his feet, an experiment invented by the French mathematician Jean B. L. Foucault nearly a century ago, was repeated recently under unusually impressive circumstances before an international scientific congress at Florence, Italy, the same city where Galileo was once persecuted for holding the same opinion. From the center of the dome of Church of Santa Maria de Fiore, Father Guido Alfani, director of the Astronomical Observatory, suspended a 200-pound weight on a wire 150 feet long. On the bottom of this weight was a tiny projecting point which traced a line on a tabletop sprinkled with sand as the great pendulum swings slowly back and forth. At a given signal, Father Alfani set the pendulum to swinging. While the assembled scientists watched it, slowly but surely the line traced across the sand tabletop changed direction. As Foucault proved long ago, and the watching scientists well knew, the table was being twisted underneath the pendulum by the rotation of the Earth. A revolutionary airplane! A new airplane propeller has recently been patented by J. Kalmanson of Brooklyn, New York. Greater speed and marked saving in fuel is claimed for the invention, which may be attached to any type of aeroplane. The device is in two parts, which may be used separately as front and rear propellers are combined into a single blade. The principle is that the front one acts to try to bring air to the other, giving this propeller more of a hold, so to speak, and greater power. This is accomplished by 4 air spoons, one on each side of the blade of the propeller. It's said that the device can double the speed of an airplane, raise it from the ground at 90 feet instead of the 200 feet most airplanes now require. It is also claimed the new propeller will prevent the plane from making a nosedive unless the pilot forces it to do so, and enable it to make a safe landing within a short distance. Because of the increase in power and speed, the device would also save a large amount of gasoline and oil, as well as guarding the motor from part of the strain on it. The device is said to be applicable to ships in the same principle, operating in water just as well. I don't know why there were 2 news snippets at the end of that story, but there sure were. Maybe this is, maybe they're leaning in. You know, the original title of this magazine was Astounding Stories of Science Fiction and Fact. And so too, Analog, their later rebranding is called Analog Science Fiction and Fact. So maybe that's their science fact portion for the night. Either way, yeah, we've got time. Let's dive into Silver Dome by Harl Vincent. In a secluded spot among the hills of northern New Jersey stood the old DeBost mansion, a rambling frame structure of many wings and gables that was well nigh hidden from the road by the half-mile or more of second-growth timber which intervened. High on the hill it stood, and it was only by virtue of its altitude that an occasional glimpse might be obtained of high on the hill it stood, and it was only by virtue of its altitude that an occasional glimpse might be obtained of weather-beaten gable or partially tumbled-down chimney. The place was reputed to be haunted since the death of old DeBost, some 7 years previously, and the path which once had been a winding driveway was now seldom trod by human foot. It was now 2 years since Edwin Leland bought the estate for a song and took up his residence in the gloomy old home. And it had been then vacant for 5 years since DeBost shot himself in the northeast bedroom. Leland's associates were sure he could repent of his bargain in a very short time, but he stayed on in the place, with no company save that of his manservant, an aged hunchback who was known to outsiders only as Tomas. Leland was a scientist of note before he buried himself in the DeBost place, and had been employed in the New York research laboratory of one of the large electrical manufacturers, where he was much admired and not a little envied by his fellow workers. These knew almost nothing of his habits or of his personal affairs, and were much surprised when he announced one day that he'd come into a sizable fortune and was leaving the organization to go in for private research and study. Attempts to dissuade him were of no avail, and the purchase of the DeBost property followed, after which Leland dropped from sight for nearly 2 years. Oh my, that was weird. My monitor conked out for a second there. It was very strange. Then, on a blustery winter day, a strange telephone call was received at the laboratory where he previously had worked. It was from old Tomas, out there in the DeBost mansion, and his quavering voice asked for Frank Rowley, the genial young engineer whose work had been most closely associated with Leland's. "Oh, Mr. Rowley," wailed the old man when Frank responded to the call, "I wish you would come out here right away. The master's been acting very queerly of late, and today he locked himself in his laboratory and will not answer my knocks." "Well, why don't you break in the door?" asked Frank, looking through the window at the snowstorm that still raged. "I thought of that, Mr. Rowley, but it's made of oak and it's very thick. Besides, it's bound with steel or iron straps. It's well beyond my power, you see." "Why not call the police?" growled Frank. He didn't relish the idea of 60 or 70-mile drives in a blizzard like this. "Oh, no. The master told me he'd kill me if I ever did that." Before Frank could formulate a reply, there came a sharp gasp from the other end of the line, a wailing cry, and a thud as if a falling body, and then silence. All efforts to raise Leland's number merely resulted in busy or line out of order reports following. Frank Rowley was genuinely concerned. Though he'd never been a close friend of Leland's, the two had worked on many a knotty problem together, and were in daily contact during the nearly 10 years that the other man had worked in the same laboratory. "Say, Tommy," said Frank, replacing the receiver and turning to his friend, Arnold Thompson, who sat at an adjoining desk. "Something's happened at Leland's place in Sussex County. Want to take a drive out there with me?" "What? On a day like this? Why not take the train?" "Don't be foolish, Tommy. Place 8 miles from the nearest station, which is a flag stop out in the wilds. If you could find a cab there, which you couldn't, isn't a taxi driver in Jersey who'd take you up into those mountains on a day like this. No, we'll have to drive. It'll be okay. I've got chains on the rear, heater in the old coupe. Shouldn't be too bad. What do you say?" So Tommy, who usually followed wherever Frank led, was prevailed upon to make the trip. He had no particular feeling for Leland, but he sensed an adventure, and in Frank's company he could ask for no more. Frank was a careful driver, and 3 hours were required to make the 60-mile journey. Consequently, it was late in the afternoon when they arrived at the old DeBost estate. It had stopped snowing, but the drifts were deep in spots, and Frank soon found that the car could not be driven through the winding path from the road to the house. So they left it half buried in a drift and proceeded on foot. It was a laborious task they'd undertaken, and by the time they set foot on the dilapidated porch, even Frank, husky and athletic as it was his build, was huffing and puffing, snorting from his exertions. Little Tommy, who tipped the scales at less than 120, could hardly speak. They were both wet to the waist and in none too good humor. "Holy smokes!" gasped Tommy, clamping the clinging snow from the sodden trouser legs and shoes. "If it snows any more, how in Sam Hill are we gonna get out of this place?" Or wait, no, that was Tommy. "Holy smokes!" gasped Tommy, etc. "If it snows any more, how in Sam Hill are we gonna get out of this place?" "Rotten trip I let you in for, Tommy, and I hope Leland's worth it, but darn it all, I just had to come." "Well, it's all right with me, Frank, and maybe it'll be worth it yet. The front door's open after all." He pointed to the huge oaken door, and Frank saw that it was indeed ajar. The snow on the porch was not deep, and they saw that footprints led from the open door to a corner of the porch. At that point, the snow on the railing was disturbed, as if a hurrying man had clung to it for a moment before jumping over and into the drifts below. But the tracks led no further, for the drifting snow covered all excepting a hollow where somebody had landed. "Thomas, and he was in a hustle by the looks of things, but he was frightened while at the telephone and beat it." They entered the house and closed the door behind them. It was growing quite dark, and Frank searched for the light switch. This was near the door, and at the pressure on the upper button, the spacious old hall with its open staircase was revealed dimly by the single remaining bulb in a cluster set in the center of the high ceiling. The hall was unfurnished, excepting for a telephone table and chair, the chair having fallen to the floor, and the receiver of the telephone dangling from the edge of the table by its cord. "You must have heard the chair fall," commented Tommy, "and it sure does look like if Thomas left in a hurry. I wonder what it was that frightened him." The house was eerily silent, and the words echoed awesomely through the adjoining rooms, which connected with the hall through the large open doorways. "Spooky place, isn't it?" And then they were both startled into immobility by a rumble that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Heavier and heavier became this vibration, as if some large machine was coming up to speed. Louder and louder grew said rumble, until it seemed that the rickety old house must be shaken down about their ears. Then there came a whistling scream from the depths of the earth, from far underground it seemed to be, and this mounted in pitch until their eardrums tingled. Then, abruptly, the sound ceased, the vibration stopped, and once more there was an eerie silence. Rather white-faced, Tommy gazed at Frank. "No wonder old Thomas beat it. What on earth do you suppose that is?" "Search me. But whatever it is, I'll bet it has something to do with Leland's strange actions, and we're going to find out." He had with him the large flash lamp from the car, and by its light the two made their way from room to room, searching for the iron-bound door mentioned by Tomas. They found all rooms on the first and second floors dusty and unused, with the exception of 2 bedrooms, the kitchen, the pantry, and the library. It was a gloomy and spooky old house. Floorboards creaked startlingly and unexpectedly, and the sound of their footsteps echoed dismally. "Where in time is that laboratory of Leland's?" exclaimed Frank, his ruddy features showing impatient annoyance, exaggerated to an appearance of ferocity by the light of the flash lamp. "How about the cellar?" "Probably where it is, but I don't relish this job so much. I hate to find Leland stiff down there, if that's where he is." "Me too, but we're here now. Let's go finish the job and get back home. It's cold in here." "You said it. No steam in the pipes at all. Must have let the fire go out in the furnace. That's probably in the cellar. Usually is, anyhow." While talking, Frank had opened each of the 4 doors that opened from the kitchen, and the 4th revealed a stairway that led into blackness beneath. With the beam of his torch directed at the steps, he proceeded to descend, and Tommy followed carefully. There was no light button at the head of the stairs, where it would have been placed in a more modern house, and it was not until they had reached the furnace room that they located a light fixture with a pull cord. An ordinary cellar with a furnace, coal bin, and a conglomeration of dust-covered trunks and discarded furniture was revealed, and at its far end was the iron-bound door. The door was locked and could not be shaken by the combined efforts of the two men. You'd have to have a battering ram, grunted Frank, casting about for a suitable implement. Here you are. They're just the thing we're looking for. He'd come upon a pile of logs, and one of these, evidently a section of an old telephone pole, was of some 10 or 12 inches diameter and about 15 feet long. Frank pounced upon it eagerly, and supporting most of the weight himself, led the attack on the heavy oak door with the iron band. No sound from within greeted the thunderous poundings. Clearly, if Leland was behind that door, he was either dead or at least unconscious. Finally, the double lock gave way, and Tommy and Frank were precipitated headlong into the brightly lighted room beyond. Recovering their balance, they took stock of their surroundings and were amazed at what they saw. A huge laboratory, fitted out with every modern appliance that money could buy. A completely equipped machine shop there was, bench after bench covered with the familiar paraphernalia of the chemical and physical laboratory, huge retorts and stills, complicated electrical equipment, dozens of cabinets holding crucibles, flasks, bottles, glass tubing, and whatnot. Good Lord, here's a laboratory to more than match our own. Leland's got a fortune invested here. I should say so, and a lot of stuff that our company doesn't even have. Some of it I don't even know the use of. But where's Leland? There was no sign of the man they'd come to help. He was not in the laboratory, though the door had been locked from within and the lights left burning throughout. With painstaking care, they searched every nook and cranny of the large single room and were about to give up in despair when Tommy happened to observe an ivory button set into the wall at the only point in the room where there were no machines or benches at hand. Experimentally, he pushed the button, and at the answering rumble from under his feet, jumped back in alarm. Slowly there opened in the paneled oak wall a rectangular door, a door of large enough size to admit a man. From the recess beyond there came a breath of air, foul with a musty odor of decayed vegetation, dank as the air of a tomb. Ah, so this is where that Ed Leland's hiding, the secret retreat of a gloomy scientist, hmm? He spoke, half jestingly, yet when he squeezed his stalwart bulk through the opening and flashed the beam of his light into the darkness of a narrow passage ahead, he was assailed with more vague forebodings. Tommy followed close behind and spoke not a word. The passage floor was thick with dust, but gave the marks of many footsteps going and returning, giving mute evidence of the frequency of Leland's visits. The air was heavy and oppressive, and the temperature and humidity increased as they progressed through the winding length of the rock-walled passageway. The floor sloped ever downward, and in spots was slippery with slimy seepage. Slippery with slimy seepage. That's a good phrase. It seemed that they turned their back on their course several occasions, but were descending deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountain. Then, abruptly, the passage ended at the mouth of a shaft which dropped vertically from almost beneath their feet. Sorry, Library's looking very intently at something over here. Whoa, another step and I'd have dropped right into it. This is probably what happened to Leland. He knelt at the rim of the circular opening and looked into the depths of the pit, Tommy following suit behind. The feeble ray of the flashlight was lost in the blackness below. Say, Frank, turn off the flash. I think I saw a light down there. And with the snapping of the catch there came darkness, but miles below them, it seemed, was a tiny pinpoint of brilliance, an eerie green light that was like a wavering phosphorescence of the will-o'-the-wisp. For a moment it shone, and then it was gone. Then came the dreadful vibration that experienced in the hall of the house, the whistling scream that grew louder and louder until it seemed they must be deafened. The penetrating wail rose from the depths of the pit, and the vibration was all around them of the damp rock on which they knelt, in the very air of the cavern. Hastily, Frank snapped on the light of his flash. Oh boy, Leland's certainly up to something down there. No, make no mistake about it. How are we gonna get that? That's Frank talking. Never mind. Oh boy, Leland is certainly up to something down there, and make no mistake, how are we gonna get down there? Get down? You don't want to go down there, do you? Sure thing. We're this far now, and by George, we're gonna find out all there is to learn. How deep do you suppose it is? Oh, pretty deep, Tommy, but we can get an idea by dropping a stone and counting the seconds till it strikes. He played the light over the He played the light of the flash over the floor and soon located a smooth, round stone about the size of a baseball. This he tossed over the rim of the pit and awaited the result. Good grief, it's not falling. What he said was true. The stone poised lightly over the opening and drifted like a feather. Then slowly it moved, settling gradually into oblivion. Frank turned the flash downward, and there they watched in astonishment as the 2-pound pebble floated deliberately down the center of the shaft at a rate of not more than 1 foot in each second. Well, I'll be doggone. Leland has done it. He's conquered gravity. For in that pit, at least, there's no gravity. Not at least of any rate enough to mention. It's been almost completely counteracted by some force he's discovered. Now we know how to follow him down there. Come on, Tommy, let's go. And, suiting action to his words, Frank jumped into the mouth of the pit, where he bobbed about a moment, for as if he'd jumped into a pool of water. Then slowly he sank from view. Tommy followed him. It was a most unique experience, that drop into the heart of the mountain. Practically weightless, the two young men found it quite difficult to negotiate the passage. For the first 100 or more feet, they continued to bump about in the narrow shaft, and each sustained painful bruises before he learned that the best and simplest method of accommodating himself to the strange condition was to remain absolutely motionless and allow the greatly weakened gravity to take its course. Each movement of an arm or leg was accompanied by a change in direction of movement, and unfortunately contact with the hard stone walls would follow. If it was likely to be an even more serious bump on the opposite side of the shaft, given if they endeavored to push themselves from the contact, the result was likely to be an even more serious bump on the opposite side of the shaft. So they continued the leisurely drop into the unknown depths of the pit. Frank had turned off the flash lamp, for its battery was giving out, and he wished to conserve its remaining energy for eventualities. And so thusly they were in Stygian darkness for nearly a half hour, though the green luminosity far beneath them grew stronger with each passing minute. It now revealed itself as a clearly defined disk of light that flickered and sputtered continually, frequently lighting the lower end of the shaft with an unusual burst of brilliance. Remotely distant it seemed, though, and unconscionably slow in drawing nearer. How far do you think we must drop? Called Tommy to Frank, who was probably 50 feet below him in the shaft. Well, I figure we have fallen about 1,000 feet so far, and my guess is we're about a third of the way down. Then this shaft is 1.5 miles deep? Yes, at least 1,000 yards, I should say. I hope his gravity-neutralizing machinery doesn't quit all of a sudden and let us down. Me too, called Tommy, who hadn't thought of that possibility. This was no joke, this falling into an unknown region so far beneath the surface of good old Mother Earth, thought Tommy. And how would they ever return was another thing that wasn't so funny. Frank was always rushing into things like this without counting the possible cost. Then, well, this might be the last time. Gradually, the mysterious light became stronger, and soon they could make out the conformation of the rock walls they were passing at a snail's pace. Layers of varicolored rock showed here and there, and at one point there was a stratum of gold-bearing or mica-filled rock that glistened with 1,000,000 reflections and re-reflections. The air grew warmer and more humid as they neared the mysterious light source. They moved steadily, without acceleration, and Frank estimated the rate at about 40 feet a minute. Then, with blinding suddenness, the light was immediately below, and they drifted into a tremulous cavern that was illuminated by its glow. Directly beneath the lower end of the shaft through which they'd passed, There was a glowing disk of metal about 15 feet in diameter. They drifted to its surface and sprawled awkwardly where they fell. Scrambling to gain a footing, they bounced and floated about like toy balloons before realizing it would be necessary to creep slowly from the influence of that repelling force which had made the long drop possible without injury. Gravity met them at the disk's edge with what seemed to be unusual violence. At first it seemed that their bodies weighed twice the normal amount, but this feeling soon passed, and they looked about themselves with incredulous amazement. The metal disc was quite evidently the medium through which the repelling force was set up in the shaft, and to this disc was connected a series of heavy cables that led to a pedestal nearby. On the pedestal was a controlling lever, and this moved over a quadrant that was graduated in degrees, one end of the quadrant being labeled up and the other labeled down. The lever now stood at a point but a very few degrees from the center, or the 0 mark, and on the down side. Frank pulled this lever over the full down position and found that they could walk over the disc with normal gravity. I suppose that if the lever is at the other end of the scale, one would fall upward with full gravity acceleration reversed. At 0, gravity is practically neutralized, and the intermediate positions are useful in conveying materials or human beings up and down the shaft as desired. Very clever, but what's the reason for it all? In the precise center of the great cavern, there was a dome or hemisphere of polished metal, and it was from this dome that every light emanated. At times, when the light died down, this dome gleamed with dull flickerings that threatened to vanish entirely. Then, suddenly, it would resume full brilliance, and the sight was marvelous beyond description. A slight hissing sound came from the direction of the dome, and this varied in intensity as did the light. Gosh, that looks like silver to me. If it is, what a wealthy man our friend Leland's become. He spent his fortune well, even if he used it to get all this. Yes, but where is he? Leland! Leland! His voice echoed through the huge vault and re-echoed hollowly, but there was no reply save renewed flickerings from the dome. Leaving the vicinity of the gravity disk, the two men advanced in the direction of the shining dome, which was about a quarter-mile from where they both stood. Both perspired freely, for the air was very close and the temperature high. But the light of the dome was as cold as the light of a firefly, and they had no hesitancy in drawing near. It was a beautiful sight, this dome of silver with its flickering lights and perfect contour. By George, I believe it is silver, exclaimed Frank when they were within a few feet of the dome. No other metal has that precise color. Look, there's a wheelbarrow, some mining tools. Leland's been cutting away some of the material. Sure enough, there was indisputable evidence of the truth of this statement, and the material was undoubtedly silver. A silver dome, breathed Tommy, holding a lump of the metal in his hand. A solid dome of pure silver, 50 feet high, 100 in diameter. How much does that figure in dollars and cents, Frank? Well, maybe it isn't solid, though it's worth a sizable fortune, even if it is hollow. We haven't found Leland yet besides. They circled the dome twice and looked into every corner of the great cavern, but there was no sign of the man for whom they searched. The wheelbarrow was half filled with lumps of the heavy metal, and maul and drill lay where they had been dropped by the lone miner. A cavity 3 feet across and as many deep appeared in the side of the dome, to show that considerably more than one wheelbarrow had been removed. Funny, it seems almost like the old dome had swallowed him up. At his words, there came the terrific vibration. The light of the dome died out, leaving them in utter darkness, and from the interior there rose the mounting scream that had frightened old Thomas away. From so close by, it was hideous, devastating. The two men clung to each other in fright, expecting momentarily the earth would give way beneath their feet and precipitate them into some terrible depth from which there'd be no return. Then the sound abruptly ceased, and a gleam of light came from under the dome of silver. A crack appeared beneath its lower edge and the rocky floor of the cavern, and through this crack there shone a light of gazing brilliancy, a warm light of a rosy hue. Wider grew the opening until there was a full 3 feet between the floor and the bottom of the dome. Impelled by some irresistible force from within, The two men stumbled blindly to the opening, fell to the floor, and rolled inside. There was a heavy thud, and the dome had returned to its original position, with Frank and Tommy prisoners within its spacious hollow. The warm light bathed them with fearful intensity for a moment, then faded to a rosy glow that dulled their senses and quieted their nerves. Morpheus claimed. Currently resisting the urge to let Morpheus claim me. How long is this one, by the way? Oh, this has got a good few pages to it. Oh, no, yeah, a bunch goes on. They, go on a whole subterranean adventure. Yeah, this one might take us a while. Ooh, after this, though, is Earth the Marauder Part 2 of a 3-part novel. We did Part 2 back in Season 2. If/when we get there, that is something for you all to consider. Anyway, here we are. I had a little more steam yet. Let's see how long it can hold out from Morpheus claiming me, shall we? When Frank awoke, he found himself between silken covers, and for a moment he gazed thoughtfully at a high arched ceiling that was entirely unfamiliar. Then, remembering, he sprang from the downy bed to his feet. The room, the furnishings, his silken robe, everything was strange. His bed, he saw, was a high one, and the frame was of the same gleaming silver as the dome under which they'd been trapped. The arched ceiling glowed softly with the same rosy hue as had the inner surface of the dome. A large pool of water invited him, the surface of the pool being no more than a foot below the point where it was built into the floor of his room. A large open doorway connected with a similar adjoining room, where he suspected Tommy had been taken. On his bare toes, he moved silently to the other room, and saw that his guess had been correct. Tommy lay sleeping quietly beneath covers, as soft as his own and amidst equal luxury of surroundings. Well, this doesn't look as though we could come to any harm. Might as well take a dive in that pool. Returning to his own room, he removed the silken garment from which he had been provided, and was quietly immersed in the cool, invigorating water of the bath, when his head cleared instantly. "Hi there," called Tommy from the doorway. "Why didn't you wake me up? Where are we, anyway?" With dripping head and shoulders above the water, Frank was compelled to laugh at the sleepy-eyed, wondering expression on the blue-jowled face of his friend. "Oh, thought you were dead to the world, you old sleepyhead. I don't know where we are, excepting that it's somewhere underneath the silver dome. What's more, I don't much care. You should get into the water. It's great." So saying, he dived to the bottom of the pool and stood on his hands, his feet waving ludicrously above the surface. Tommy sniffed once and then made a quick dash for the pool in his own room. He was not to be outdone by his more energetic partner. A half hour later, shaved and attired in their own garments, which had been cleaned and pressed and hung neatly in the closets, they settled themselves for a discussion of the situation. Having tried the doors of both rooms and finding them locked from the outside, while there was no other course open to them, they must await developments. "Looks like Leland has quite an establishment down here inside the mountain." "This place is none of Leland's work. He's probably a prisoner here as we are. He just stumbled onto their silver dome, was captured by whatever race is living down here beneath it, same as we were. Who the real inhabitants are, what the true purpose of all this is, it remains to be seen." "You think we're in friendly hands?" "Those quarters do not look much like prison cells, Tommy, but I must admit it's odd that we're locked in. Anyhow, I'm not worrying. We'll soon learn our fate and have to be ready to meet it. And the people who own this place must have everything they want, and they sure have some scientific knowledge that is not known up to us on the surface." "Wonder if they're humans?" "Well, certainly they are. Never heard of wild beasts sleeping in beds like these, did you?" Tommy laughed as he examined the exquisite hand-wrought figures on the silver bedstead. "No, I didn't, but Where on earth did they come from? What are they doing here? Well, you ask too many questions, replied Frank, shrugging his broad shoulders. We must simply wait for the answers to reveal themselves. There was a soft rap at the door of Frank's room where the two men were talking. Come in, called Frank, chuckling at the idea of such consideration from captors. A key rattled in the lock, and the door swung open to admit the handsomest man they'd ever set eyes on. He was taller by Frank than several inches, standing no less than 6'5" in his He was taller than Frank by several inches, standing no less than 6 feet 5 He was taller than Frank by several inches, standing no less than 6 feet 5 in his thin-soled sandals, and he carried himself with the air of an emperor. His marble white body was uncovered with the exception of a loincloth of silver hue, and lithe muscles rippled beneath his smooth skin as he advanced to meet the prisoners. His head, surmounted by curly hair of ebon darkness, was large, and his forehead was high. The features were classic and perfectly regular. The corners of his mouth drew upward in a benign smile. Greetings, he said in perfect English in a soft voice, to the domain of Theros. You need fear no harm from our people, and will be returned to the upper world when the time comes. We hope to make your stay with us enjoyable and instructive, and that you will carry back kind memories of us. The morning meal awaits you now. So taken aback were the two young Americans that they stared foolishly agape for a space. Then a tinkling laugh from the tall stranger set them once more at ease. Well, you will pardon us, I hope, but this is all so unexpected and unbelievable, your words struck us speechless. I know that my friend was similarly affected. We place ourselves in your hand. The handsome giant nodded his understanding. No offense was taken, since none was intended, and your feelings are not to be wondered at. You may call me Orin. He turned toward the open door and signified that they were to follow him. They fell in at his side with alacrity, both suddenly realizing they were very, very hungry. They followed in short wonderment as Orin led the way to a broad balcony that overlooked a great underground city, a city lighted by the soft glow from some vast lighting system incorporated in its vaulted ceiling high overhead. The balcony was many levels above the streets, which were alive with active beings, which were alive with active beings of similar appearances to Orin, these speeding hither and yon by the means of unraveling which the speeding hither and yon by the many lanes of traveling ways of which the streets would comprise. The buildings, endless rows of them lining the orderly streets, were octagonal in shape and rose to the height of nearly 20 stories, as neatly as could be judged by Earth standards. There were no windows, but about every fifth floor there was an outer silver-railed balcony, similar to the one on which they walked. The air was filled with bowl-shaped flying ships that sped over the rooftops in an endless procession, and without visible means of support or propulsion. Yet the general effect of the busy scene was one of precise orderliness, unmarred by confusion or distracting noises. I can make it a bit farther. Orin vouchsafed no explanations, and they soon re-entered the large building of which the balcony was a part. Here they were conducted to a sumptuously furnished dining room where their breakfast awaited them. During the meal, which consisted of several courses of fruits and cereals entirely strange to Frank and Tommy, they were tended to by Orin with the utmost deference and most painstaking attention. He anticipated every one of their wants, and their thoughts as well. For when Frank endeavored to ask one of the many questions with which his mind was filled, he was interrupted by a wave of a hand and a smile from his placid host. It is quite clear to me that you have many questions to propound, and this is not a matter of wonder. But it is not permitted that I enlighten you on the points you have in mind. You must first finish your meal. Then it is to be my privilege to conduct you to the presence of Phaestra, Empress of Theros, who will reveal all. May I ask that you be patient until then? So friendly was his smile, and so polished his manner, that they restrained their impatience and finished the excellent breakfast in polite silence. And Oren was as good as his word, for no sooner had they finished when he led them from the room and showed the way to the elevator, which conveyed them to the upper floor of the building. From the silver-grilled cage of the lift, they stepped into a room of such beauty and magnificence of decoration that they gazed about them in wondering admiration. The paneling and molding were of hammered silver that gleamed with polished splendor in the soft rose glow of the hidden lights. The hangings were of heavy plush, of deep green hue. They bore intricate designs of silver thread woven into the material. At the opposite side of the room there was a pair of large double doors, huge double doors of chased silver, and on either side of this pretentious portal there stood an attendant, attired as was Orin, but bearing a silver scepter to denote his official capacity.
Phaestra awaits the visitors from above,
intoned one of the attendants. Both bowed stiffly from the waist when Orin led the two young scientists through the great doors which had opened silently and majestically at their approach. If the outer room was astonishing in its sumptuousness of decoration and furnishing, the one they now entered was positively breathtaking. On every side there were exquisite green and silver hangings, tables, divans, rugs of priceless design and workmanship, but the beauty of the surroundings faded into insignificance when they saw the Empress. A canopied dais in the center of the room drew their attention, and they saw that Phaestra had risen from her seat in a deeply cushioned divan, and now stood at its side in an attitude of welcome. Nearly as tall as Frank, she was a figure of commanding and imperious beauty. The whiteness of her body was accentuated by the silver-embroidered and tightly fitted black vestments that covered, yet did not conceal, its charms. A halo of glorious golden hair surmounted a head that was poised perfectly alert above the rounded shoulders. The exquisite oval of her expectant face was chiseled in features of transcendent loveliness. She spoke, and at the sound of her musical voice Frank and Tommy were enslaved. "Gentlemen of the upper world," she said gently, "you are welcome to Theros. Your innermost thoughts have been recorded by our scientists and found good. With a definite purpose in mind, you learned of the existence of the silver dome of Theros, yet you came without greed or malice, and we have taken you in to enlighten you on the many questions that are in your minds, and to return you to mankind with a knowledge of Theros, which you must keep secret. You are about to delve into a mystery of the ages, to see and learn many things that are beyond the ken of your kind. It is a privilege never before recorded to beings from above." We thank you, O Queen," spoke Frank humbly, his eyes riveted to the gaze of those violet orbs that seemed to see into his very soul. Tommy mumbled some commonplace. "Orin, the sphere, please," Phaestra said, slightly embarrassed by Frank's stare, and clapped her hands. At her command, Orin, who had stood quietly by, stepped to the far wall and manipulated some mechanism that was hidden by the hangings. There was a musical purr from beneath the floor, and through a circular opening, which appeared as if by magic, there rose a crystal sphere of some 4 feet in diameter. Slowly it rose until it reached the level of their eyes, and there it came to rest. The Empress raised her hands, as if in invocation, and the soft glow of the lights died down, leaving them in momentary darkness. There came a slight murmur from the sphere, and it lighted with the eerie There came a slight murmur from the sphere, and it lighted with the eerie green flickerings they'd observed in the dome of silver. Fascinated by the weaving lights within, They gazed in the depths of the crystal with awed expectancy, and Phaestra spoke.
Men from the surface, you, Frank Rowley, and you, Arnold Thompson, are about to witness the powers of that hemisphere of metal you were pleased to term Silver Dome. As you rightly surmise, the dome is of silver, mostly. There are small percentages of platinum, iridium, and other elements, but it is more than 9/10 pure silver. To you, of the surface, the alloy is highly valuable for its intrinsic worth by your own standards, but to us, the value of the dome lies in its function, in revealing the past and present and events of our universe. The dome is the eye of a quite complex apparatus which enables us to see and hear any desired happening on the surface of the earth, beneath its surface, or on one of many inhabited planets of the heavens. That's accomplished by means of extremely complex vibrations radiated from the hemisphere, these vibrations penetrating earth, metals, buildings, space itself, returning to our viewing in sound-reproducing spheres, to reveal the desired past or present occurrences at which the rays of vibration are detected.
It's a giant radio telescope. Actually, a cargo cult forming around a radio telescope would be a really fun, like, apocalypse. Like, if you were to play an apocalypse-focused tabletop game, forming a cargo cult around, like, following the given schedule of a radio telescope, because, like, radio telescopes, like, the schedule for most radio telescopes, because it's an incredibly valuable scientific instrument, they're gonna have rough plans, like, easily 5-10 years in the future, you would think, right? So, like, what if like, you know, the world ends or whatever, and, like, the people on site for the radio telescope are like, well, the world ended, we need something to do, let's just keep using this telescope and see once if we can find someone out in, you know, space that maybe can repair our civilization a little bit. And so, like, over generations in the town near the radio telescope, like, more and more people, you know, as English, I assume English. Well, let's take the big radio telescope in Brazil, right? As Portuguese, because they speak Portuguese in Brazil because they got colonized by Portugal. Let's as Portuguese there semantically drifts away from the originally, you know, from the last known Portuguese TM, they're going to be able to understand less and less of these manuals, only understanding them phonetically. And, like, you know, you could very easily imagine, you know, it becoming, you know, I'm trying to describe the concept of cargo cult here. Basically, it's just they are performing the rituals because at some point along the line they were like, this is the only point of stability in our life, so it has become reverent, and then naturally over the course of years it has now become, like, you know, an actual religion. And so, like, you know, they're reading off sets of numbers from the schedule to aim coordinates, and, like, it's all chanted or something. You know, it's a really fun concept to think about. That's probably not what this is going to do. That's a very modern take on, we've found a giant viewing eye that lets us see anywhere. But it could be interesting. Actually, I might sit on that radio telescope apocalypse idea. There's a couple games I have that are, like, designed around building post-apocalyptic worlds, not the least of which being the Quiet Year. You know, or there's other games along that line too. It could be a fun story prompt to explore. I've seen it done several times before with other things. You know, you try to defamiliarize yourself with something very simple in front of you. Oh man. Oh, that's a short story I need to contact the author about, is To Steal an Angel, because in that short story collection, there's one focusing on a cargo cult that evolved out of a spacefaring civilization. They crashed, and then the center console, like the communications console, was the only thing that survived from the ship. And so over several generations, the like Mayday, 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 Central Control, are you there? We've crashed, etc., etc., becomes like a mantra they say at this like altar that's actually the communications array. It's fascinating. I have to reach out to the author to see if we can read it, because that's honestly what was sticking in the back of my head as I was thinking about, like, well, what would that look like at like the big telescope in Arecibo? I digress. Let's read a little more. I've got a little more in me here. In order to view the past on our own planet, the rays which travel at the speed of light are sent out in a huge circle through space, returning to Earth after having spent the requisite number of years in transit. Instantaneous effect is secured by a connecting beam that ties together the ends of the enormous arc. This, of course, is beyond your comprehension, since the ninth dimension is involved. When it is desired that the events of the present be observed, the rays are projected directly. The future cannot be viewed, since, in order to accomplish this, it would be necessary that the rays travel at a speed greater than the speed of light, which is manifestly impossible. Great guns! This crystal sphere, then, it's capable of bringing up to our eyes and ears the happenings of centuries past?
It is, my dear Frank, and I would that I were able to describe the process a little more clearly.
She smiled, and in the unearthly light of the sphere she appeared more beautiful than before, if such a thing were possible. On the pedestal which supported the sphere there was a glittering array of dials and levers. Several of these controls were now adjusted by Phaestra, the delicate motions of her tapered fingers being watched by the visitors with an intense admiration. There came a change in the note of the sphere, a steadying of the flickerings within.
Behold!
Exclaimed Phaestra. They gazed into the depths of the sphere, and lost all sense of detachment from the scene depicted therein. It seemed they were at a point several thousand miles from the surface of a planet. A great continent spread beneath them, its irregular shoreline being clearly outlined against a large body of water. Here and there, the surface was obscured by great white patches of clouds that cast their shadows below.
Atlantis,
breathed Phaestra reverently. A lost continent of mythology, the fabled body of land that was engulfed by the Atlantic thousands of years ago, a fact right in front of their faces. Tommy glanced at Frank, noting that he had withdrawn his gaze from the sphere and was devouring Phaestra with his eyes instead. As if drawn by the ardor of his observation, she raised her own eyes from the sphere to meet those of the handsome visitor. Obviously confused, she dropped her long lashes and turned nervously to the controls. Tommy experienced a sudden falling of dread. Surely his pal wasn't falling in love with a Theronian empress. Then there came another change in the note of the sphere, and once more they lost themselves in contemplation of the scene within. The surface of the lost continent was rushing madly to meet them. With terrific velocity they seemed to be falling. An involuntary gasp was forced from Tommy's lips. Mountains, valleys, rivers could now be discerned. The scene shifted slightly. They were stationary, directly above a large seacoast city. A city of great beauty it was. Its buildings were of the same octagonal shape as were those of Theros. There could be but one influence. The Theronians were direct descendants of those inhabitants of the ancient Atlantis.
yes,
Sighed Phaestra, in answer to the thought she had read.
our ancestors were those you now see in the streets of this city of Atlantis. A marvelous race they were, too. When the rest of the world was still savage and unenlightened, they knew more of the arts and sciences. When the rest of the world was still savage and unenlightened, they knew more of the arts and sciences than is known on the surface today. The mysteries of the fourth dimension they'd already solved. Their telescopes were of such power they knew of the existence of intelligent beings on Mars and Venus. They'd conquered the air, they knew of a relation between gravity and magnetism, but recently propounded by your Einstein. They were prosperous, happy then. But what?
Faint sounds of the life of the city came to their ears. A swarm of monoplanes rolled past just beneath them. The streets were crowded with rapidly moving vehicles, the rooftops with aircraft. Then, suddenly, the scene darkened. A deep rumbling came from the sea. As they watched in fascinated wonder, a great chasm opened up through the heart of the city. Tall buildings swayed and crumbled, falling into heaps of twisted metal and crushed masonry and burying the hundreds of the populace in their fall. The confusion was indescribable, the uproar terrific, and within the space of a very few minutes, the entire city was a mass of ruins, fully half of the wrecked area having been swallowed up by the heaving waves of the ocean already. Phaestra stifled a sob.
Thus it began. Trovus was first, the city you just saw. Then came 3 more of the cities of the western coast in rapid succession. Computations of the scientists showed that the upheaval was widespread. The entire continent was to be engulfed in a very short time. The exodus began, but it was too late. Only a few hundred people were able to escape the continent before it was finally destroyed. The ocean became the tomb of 200 millions. A handful of survivors reached the coast of what is now North America. But the rigors of the climate proved severe, and more than 3/4 of them perished within a few days after their planes landed. The rest took to the caves along the shore, and for a while we were safe.
She manipulated the controls once more, and there was a quick shift to another coast, a rugged, wave-beaten shore. Closer they drew until they observed a lofty palisade that extended for miles along the barren waterfront. They saw a fire atop this elevation, and active men and women at various tasks within the narrow circle of its warmth. A cave mouth opened at the brink of the precipice near the spot they occupied. Then came a repetition of the upheaval at Trovus. The ocean rushed in and beat against the cliff with such ferocity that its spray was tossed hundreds of feet in the air. The earth shook, and the group of people around the fire made a hasty retreat to the mouth of the cave. The sky darkened, and the winds howled with demoniac fury. Quake after quake rent the rugged cliffs, huge sections toppling into the angry waters. Then a great tidal wave swept in and covered everything, cliffs, cave mouths, and all. Naught remained where they had been but the seething waters.
But some escaped, and these discovered Theros. Though many miles of the eastern seaboard of your United States were though many miles of the eastern seaboard of your United States were submerged and the coastline entirely altered, these few were saved. Their cave connected with a long passage, a tunnel that led to the bowels of the earth. With the outer entrance blocked by the upheaval, they had no alternative save to continue downward. They traveled for days and days. Some were overcome by hunger and fell by the wayside. The most hardy survived to reach Theros, a series of enormous caverns that extends for hundreds of miles underneath the surface of your country. Here they found subterranean lakes of pure water, forests, game. They had a few tools and weapons, and they established themselves in this underground world. From that small beginning came this.
Phaestra's slim fingers worked rapidly at the controls. The scenes shifted in quick succession. They were once more in the present, and seemed to be traveling speedily through the underground reaches of Theros. Now they were racing through a long, lighted passage, now over a great city, similar to the one in which they had arrived. Here they visited a huge workshop or laboratory, there a mine where radium or cobalt or platinum was being wrested from the vitals of the unwilling earth. Then they visited a typical Theronian household, saw the perfect peace and happiness in which the family lived. Again, they were all in a large power plant, where direct application of the internal heat of the earth, obtained through deep shaft bored into the interior, was utilized in generating electricity. When did we know how to acquire electricity via geothermal boring? Because this came out in 1930, right? We know this. So, like, how speculative is this? Because this is a thing that you and I, modern people, understand to be a technology that's not that hard to, provided the correct boring equipment. It's actually quite simple. When was geothermal power invented? When was geothermal power first used to make electricity? 1904. At a dry steam field in Tuscany, Italy. So, yeah. Peoples of ancient Greece and Rome used the hot springs arising from the deep earth. Yeah, French engineer Francois Jacques de Lederel, a French engineer in Italy, pioneered a new way to extract boric acid from hot springs. Others developed a means to extract the acid using fire to evaporate the water. De Lederel was the first to harness the region's substantial geothermal energy to drive the process to create extracted boric acid. Larderello, the town that grew up around this industrial practice, was also home to the first successful effort to produce electricity with geothermal energy. In 1904, Italian scientist Piero Gignori Conti successfully used geothermal energy to power a small generator capable of lighting several light bulbs. This modest beginning was the foundation for much larger experiments, and in 1913, Larderello became the site of the world's first commercial geothermal power plant. So by 1913, this was a small technology that was getting use in places. So this is not like unreasonable speculation. Like, this is not unreasonable specfic to be writing. Fascinating. Anyway, where was I? They saw vast quantities of supplies, 50-ton masses of machinery moved from place to place as lightly as feathers by use of the gravity disks, those heavily charged plates whose emanations counteracted the Earth's attraction. In one busy laboratory, they saw an immense television apparatus and heard scientists discussing moot questions with inhabitants of Venus, whose images were projected upon the screen. They witnessed a severe electrical storm in the huge cavern arch over one of the cities, a storm that condensed moisture from the artificially oxygenated and humidified atmosphere in such blinding sheets as to easily explain the necessity for well-roofed buildings in the underground realm. And in all the speech and activities of the Theronians, there was evident that all-pervading feeling of absolute contentment and freedom from care. "What I cannot understand," said Frank during a quiet interval, "is why the Theronians have never migrated to the surface. Surely, with all your command of science and mechanics, that would be quite simple." "Why? Why?" Phaester's voice spoke volumes. "Here, I'll show you the reason." And again the scene in the sphere changed. They were on the surface, a few years in the past, at Chateau Thierry. They saw that their fellow man mangled and broken, saw human beings shot down by hundreds in withering bursts of machine gun fire, saw them in hand-to-hand bayonet fights, gassed and in delirium from the horror of it all. They traveled over the ocean, saw a big passenger liner the victim of torpedo fire, saw babies tossed into the water by distracted mothers who jumped in after them to join them in death. A few years passed by. They saw gang wars in Chicago and New York, militia and picketing strikers in mortal combat. Wealthy brokers and bank presidents turned pistols on themselves following a crash in the stock market. Government officials serving penitentiary terms for betrayal of the people's trust. Opium dens, speakeasies, sexual crimes. It was a fearful indictment. "Oh no, the surface world has not yet emerged from its savagery. We should be unwelcome were we to adventure outside.
And now we come to the reason for your visit. You come in the search of one Edwin Leland, a fellow worker at one time. Your motives are above reproach, but Leland came as a greedy searcher of riches. We brought him within to teach him the error of his ways, to beg him to desist from his efforts at destroying the dome of silver. He alone knew the secret, after all. And you followed him, and we took you in for similar reasons, though our scientists found very quickly that your mental reactions were entirely of a different type from Leland's. The secret would be safe in your keeping, after all. Leland remains obdurate. He threatens us with physical violence. His reactions to the thought-reading machines are of the most treacherous sort. We must keep him with us. He shall remain unharmed, but he must not be allowed to return. That's the story. You two are free to leave when you choose. I ask not that you give your word to keep the secret of the Silver Dome. I know it's not necessary. The lights had resumed their normal glow, and the marvelous sphere returned to its receptacle beneath the floor. Phaester resumed her seat on the canopied divan. Frank dropped to a seat on the edge of the dais, and Tommy and Orin remained standing. Tommy lost in thought, and Orin solidly mute. The Empress avoided Frank's gaze studiously. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with emotion. All right, folks. I think we're going to come back next week when we find out what Frank does to be the first to break the silence, and we find out more about this fascinating world of Theros beneath the earth. This is a really good one. I'm really enjoying it. I'm a big sucker for, like, oh yes, we traveled deep into the earth and there was a society in there, or oh, we traveled deep into remote jungles and there's a society in there, or we accidentally went to space and there's a whole society up there. It's very fun to me. It's very, like, I'm a big sucker for Sword and Planet, which we will be coming back to John Carter at some point during the season. I can't promise when, but we will be coming back to John Carter. If you really liked John Carter, if you really loved A Princess of Mars, let me know in the Discord. And maybe it'll come back faster. But I digress. Please remember that the recording of Paper Cuts is done live Friday nights over on twitch.tv/GlacerNester. If you want the visual component of this show, you should be able to reach said visual component over at Glacier Nester on YouTube. And if you want to read the book along with, if you need the text to keep your brain in the right groove, as it were, with these audio stories, there is a link to the text of the book in the show notes, alongside the other two links I just described, and a link to a Discord where we can talk about the books we've read, among several other things. All that said, I've said my piece. I've enjoyed our stories this week. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.